It was a place that did not take any soul who would not get there. Still, there were those who were allowed to get there. Only the heroes of the highest S rank could step into the forbidden dungeon. Among them was a young man with dark hair and glasses. Once in this dangerous place, he did not look frightened at all. On the contrary, it seemed that it was here that he wanted to be. Many adventure seekers have disappeared in this dungeon, and this time the hero who dared to challenge the monsters with his team will not be an exception. After all, the danger that chatted on them in the dark was too great. A few days ago, everything was calm. The person who managed others gave a clear team to check everything carefully when moving things to a new place. All actions took place in accordance with the S-class plan, called the Plan of the Future. Subsequently, the man noticed that one person did nothing. He was explained that there were some difficulties with the girl, so she could not wear heavy things. However, the girl denied and confidently said that she was able to work and wear boxes. On the other hand, there were two people, between whom there was a noticeable tension. The young guy returned to a tall man and asked what to do with him, because his behavior was completely unacceptable. The young man put his hand on the interlocutor, stopping the warrior so that he did not leave. The tall man with his sword behind his back clearly did not want to talk to the boy, but did not resist and stopped. The dark-haired guy looked closely into the eye of the leader of the group, thinking about the future, and again asked him why he was so cruel to the girl. This young man was known in the past as a skilled sword, and his name was Jill. The leader of the group, a tall man named Godak, looked at the interlocutor annoyingly, in no hurry to answer. He was not even going to discuss this issue because he considered himself better than others and did not want to waste time. The young man stated that he had come to follow the order, and he was indifferent who violates him. He was not going to remain silent. The branch advised Godak to think about his adventure reputation. The man put his hand to his forehead and sighed heavily. He could not understand what he did not please the boy, so he asked directly why there were no methods that the leader of the future group uses against the subordinates. The girl tried to stop the young man because she did not want a conflict because of her, but the guy gently stopped her and asked not to interfere, explaining that he should do what he sees fit. The branch looked at the Godak once again and added that he did not like what the guy is doing, but since they have a contract, he does not want to violate the arrangements and tries to comply with all the conditions. The branch asked what the man was planning to do if he went. Maybe he would tell everyone that the boys were burden. The Geotot was clearly not happy about such an assumption, and the interlocutor added that the man should curb his orders. Since the group was going to go to the most dangerous dungeon, they had no place for controversy. Goha listened to him that Jill had told him, but could not agree that he was mistaken, because he was convinced of his correctness. Turning, the man went to the exit, but finally advised the guild not to stand out too much and not to take the role of the leader. After all, in the dungeon he will still have to obey the orders of a real leader. Otherwise they can kill. The young man was completely satisfied and did not argue, simply watched the go. And the man, realizing that he could not do anything with the guy, decided to make a remark to his subordinates, which at this time pulled the boxes with the provision. When the branch was about to go away, he heard that someone was trying to say something behind, but for a long time he did not dare. Looking back, he saw the same girl he stood up for. She looked confused and did not know how to behave. A girl named Clea was a brand new assistant who had just joined the future project. She sincerely thanked the young man for his help. She was embarrassed because she did not cope with this task. Clea also apologized to the guy for protecting her before the Bodaha, but he only calmly replied that he did what he needed, so he did not need to thank. When all the preparations were finally over, the train with the provision and the whole team went on the road. The road to the dungeon was far away, so the preparation took a lot of time. While traveling in carriages, the girl decided to talk to the one who helped her. She turned to Jill and wondered if he was true that he studied the art of owning a sword with a man who lived a recluse. The guy laughed aware, surprised at how to just believe in every word heard, because he was once told that he was a well-known dragonflower from the east. The girl also confessed that she learned everything from Godok because it was he who told her about Jill. The young man in response said that he won the dragon not himself, but with his teacher, although he was sure he would have coped himself. The young man did not have time to arrange how the carriage stopped sharply. The young man fell and muttered that he could never get used to such sudden stops. Make sure that everything was fine with the guy. The quilted returned to the conversation again, and when the girl took her hands, she suggested Jill sit down, and she happily agreed. In the meantime, the guy noted that he did not like to wait so long to finally get into such a dangerous dungeon. After a short pause, Clea was slightly bored and confessed that she was only a new assistant in this group, which was taken through plans for the future. Lowering her head, The girl asked timidly whether Gili could ask a question that had not had rest for a long time. Clea turned to see the young man's reaction and asked how to become stronger. At first, Gil did not even understand what she was waiting for him. Jill looked with horror on Clea, not believing that the girl really wants to hear it from him. The assistant could not understand why her question caused such a strange reaction in the interlocutor. The girl was confused and began to justify, but the guy only asked why she was addressing him, because he considered herself not special. Clea replied that she dreamed of adventures since her childhood and always wanted to travel. Therefore, she was carefully preparing. She collected things, trained to possible battles, and now it has come and a moment. She has grown up to age when he can become a real experience of adventure. The girl also replied that she wants to master the art of possession of the sword, because survival skills are very important for any adventure, and strength is necessary to win monsters in battles. However, it was not easy to fulfill his dream. No one wanted to teach her or be a mentor because it seemed to be too heavy a burden. When the girl first joined the plan of the future, she was told that she would take special workouts. Thanks to this, she will be able to increase her rank and join the main team. However, Clea remained an assistant, because her main task was to observe others and memorize their actions. The young man realized that, in fact, no one knows how to teach others. The young man also noted that he was invited to the team purposefully, because he was not in the main warehouse, but could strengthen the team. The branch thought that it would not be easy to teach this girl. The girl became discouraged and, lowering her eyes, confessed that she understands. Her request brings a lot of trouble. The guy decided to give an example and asked how she would have done Clamahau if he suddenly appeared in front of her monsterpez or some kind of terrible monster and attacked her. The girl lifted her eyebrows in surprise. She did not expect such a change in the topic. Clea thought she had to aim, find a weak place, and hit right there. However, the young man denied and suggested trying another way. The branch continued, noting that it is best to determine in advance where the monster would go from, and to place the traps there, because preparation for the battle is the best solution. The girl did not even realize that this question could be answered so. The guy just smiled and replied that the situation was really a trap. However, his answer was the best way out of the position. Since there are no rules in fights here, everyone chooses their own path. The methods of different people may differ so much that it is difficult to compare them. Even the same person is able to act differently depending on the circumstances. However, the most important was how a person adapts to circumstances and what he is able to do when he is in danger. Gil also noted that the most important thing is that the whole fate of the battle will depend on the right decision. Even if it seems that a skill or reception will never be useful, most likely, the time it will come indispensable. The more a person has different ways to act, the stronger it becomes. If a certain tactic is truly effective in itself, it can help even when it seems there is no one hope. At the most unexpected moment, it is rescued, regardless of the circumstances. The young man added that he just wanted to say, he needed to learn more, gain experience and knowledge. It is also important to try not to get injuries and lead a healthy lifestyle. Clea looked closely at the interlocutor and noted that he was a very serious person. In response, the young man just smiled and said he was really a realist. After his gaze, the branch noted that although he said confidently, he was in fact able to be strong with a sword in his hand, and he had almost no other ways for himself. Otherwise, the young man could not boast outstanding qualities, so we can say that he had only one strength. However, he was well aware of it and tried not to envy those who were lucky to have more. The club was surprised that the young man was so rigidly treating himself, and then the guy added that he had very poor vision, and this significantly reduces his advantage over others. The guy also said that during a battle with the dragon, his eyes were covered with a curse, and from all the reinforcing effects, he was only a supplement to force. Because of this, the curse of the young man could not always notice the traps and other dangers in time. But there was another defect. Upon learning of this, the girl was scared, because now she realized how difficult Gila was. It turned out that the guy suffered from topographic disorientation. It would seem that there is nothing worse than the curse, but this problem really has caused a lot of trouble. The guy said that he first moved in the wrong direction, even being in the right state before reaching the right place. After learning about it, the girl confessed. This problem is more serious than any curse. The young man explained that if his glasses break, everything is over for him, and if he suddenly finds himself in the dungeon himself, then he may never be able to get out. The girl was confused and did not know what to answer the boy's revelation, because she was well aware of how difficult he was this conversation. Subsequently, Jill got a small package. It turned out to be the glass case. Jill added that it would be very difficult for him if they disappeared, and this would explain how great the responsibility of his interlocutor would be. However, as a detachment assistant, she had to monitor such things. It was a responsibility. Subsequently, the couple was surprised that the crew stopped. Looking out, they realized that they had already arrived in the dungeon. In order not to hold anyone, the guy with the girl was in a hurry to go out. Having taken with her all the necessary, Naka said goodbye to the guy. She had to go with other assistants. The young man stood a little, hesitated, but eventually decided to add a few more words. The branch said that if a girl wants to acquire more skills for the future, then after that the dungeon he will gladly begin to teach her. At first, it seemed to the girl that she had confused something, but the guy repeated her words again. The young man liked to teach other skills of possession of the sword, because he did not consider himself too skillful to share knowledge. In addition, his own technique was not something exceptional. He has taken experience from many different masters. Having extended his hand to the interlocutor, the young man said that he accepts her proposal, although he confessed he does not consider himself worthy of such an honor. Clea was very satisfied. She bowed deeply, carefully taking her hand extended to her. Then she sincerely thanked Gil for the fact that he agreed to help her. The promise was given, and it was a real surprise, because it happened infrequently. Clea was genuinely pleased that she would now be a real adventurer, not just to remain an assistant in someone's great plan. Shaking her hands, the couple decided that she would definitely continue the conversation when she would get out of the dungeon and become more free. But none of them even guessed what was waiting for them in such a dangerous place. 2 hours later, the guy, breaking his glasses into small pieces, remained alone in a dangerous dungeon. It happened exactly what he was most afraid. The girl learned of his weakness. The branch was on his knees, and a tear slipped from one eye. He was despair. He understood perfectly that it is almost impossible to get out of this situation, as it was simply survived at all. An incredible story once happened. In general, the conquest of the labyrinth was successful, but everything lasted only until a certain point. Even S-rank adventures have not yet gone further. The support team laid a safe route, behind which the Volna group was confidently moving forward. The main detachment moved forward, defeating the opponents on their way, and thus the warriors punched their way to go down to the lower floors. At each level, the owner, a monster who received a special magical force from the maze to protect it. Unlike other magical monsters, the owner did not wander the maze. Instead, he remained in the main hall, patiently waiting for the arrival of adventurers. Sometimes it happened that it was possible to go across the master's room and find a way to the next level, but at the third level it was impossible. The team has become noticeably more tense, especially at Endak. The branch first rushed to the monster to distract his attention, but suddenly something happened that the young man did not expect. It never happened to him. According to the plan, everything happened as they had. The avant-garde took a blow according to the construction where the attackers stood in front. No one complained about this tactic because she really gave results. Since the branches only owned the sword, it was not a surprise to be on the front line. In addition, he was not afraid of a sudden attack from afar. It was even easier for him, because for the boy it was a wonderful warm-up, but he did not feel that someone was helping him. Suddenly, he did not have time to blink his eye, as he saw his friends standing behind him. The Goda-ha had a powerful sword that everyone recognized at once. It was his branded sign. This sword was called a ripple, and before the battle, the man carefully watched how the owner fills the blade with charming energy, covering it with drops of sweat. It was quite justified, because the Lord of the Dungeon was a very strong rival. Everyone was well aware of what would happen if at least once they miss and do not hit the monster. The young man wisely decided to use the sword, and gesture made it clear to the leader that he would distract the enemy so that it would be time for the attack. But the unexpected happened. While the young man was still in the danger zone, Godagao decided to act radically. He used a deadly reception, launching a powerful magical release. The branch did not understand what was going on behind his back, because it was he who distracted the monster on himself. Only later did he become clear. A man by the name of X shocked the right moment until the guy was getting out of the danger zone. The young man began to shout, begging the Godak not to rush and wait, but all his words were in vain. The man lifted the sword and, while struck, released a dazzling outbreak of black-like night energy. Looking back, the young man realized that he would not have time to do anything to evade. A paw of the monster immediately appeared above the gun, who decided to deal with him while Gida-ha was quietly waiting for the battle. The monster struck the young man, from which he fell on the floor with a death. A powerful explosion came from that power, and irreparable happened. The explosive wave affected not only the monster and the sword, who tried to divert his attention from the team, but also the space around and all the rest of the group. But at first the earth suddenly disappeared from under the feet of the Gil, and it flew down, as if falling into the void. It seemed not to happen to him, or it was some strange sleep. Turning his head, The young man saw the owner of the third level of the maze seem to go down the air next to him. The branch realized that even in such a difficult situation, one should not forget. This monster actually tries to kill him, so he was not going to just fall and wait for the monster to be next to him on the ground. Gathering all his strength, the young man grabbed his sword and decided to beat desperately to destroy the creature that was standing nearby. It took a while, and the young man was still lying on the ground. He lost consciousness for a moment, however. When he came to his senses, he realized that he had won and lies just on his enemy's body. Pulling the sword from the monster, the young man mentally acknowledged that the winner of the third level of the dungeon was really very strong. But lifting his gaze up, the guy thought, the height from which Gil fell was too large. He had no chance of climbing back. The young guy finally realized he was in this trap, and all this happened because of the Godaks, who deliberately condemned him to death. The young man understood that it would stay with him forever. The branch could not understand why the group leader did so. After all, despite their recent quarrel, it was not a sufficient reason for such an act. Because of the recent conversation, which was extremely unpleasant to the man, Godak decided to get rid of the one who had been traveling. Raising his head, the young man shouted loudly that when he returns he would definitely take revenge on his enemy. He would not calm down until he answers his act. However, the young man faced a serious problem. He did not imagine how to go back, because he remained at all. Recalling the composition of his team, the guy did not lose hope that there would be those who could help him among his comrades. In the imagination, the image of the girl he spoke to when they were talking together into this dangerous dungeon. The young man wanted to believe that there were still good people in addition to Clea, who would not have resigned with the injustice he committed. Since no one but Clea had appeared in the boy's head, he thought, if there were more girls nearby, they would have surely saved him. All you have to do is find a long rope that girls could lower down. In order to start the execution of his seemingly impossible plan, Guild began to shout loudly at the bottom and needs rescue. However, the answer never came. The detachment had already gone far, and there was no one nearby. Looking closely at the ceiling, the young man noticed something strange and frightened on the mountain. As if from above, some mysterious creatures were watching. At the same time, Gildan was declining, because he remained in his glasses. Raising the optical device, the guy noticed that he was unharmed, because these glasses gave him some protection. However, later the glass in the frame still gave a crack. The glasses were completely broken, which meant only one thing. The next trip of the guy to the dungeon promises to be extremely difficult, so the young man got into a dangerous adventure where he was completely defenseless. While the young man gradually got used to the idea that he would have to stay in the dungeon much longer than he hoped, suddenly everyone froze with horror, seeing how everything began to collapse around. He was silent for a while, and Krakow remembered how she had recently talked to this young man and even shook his hand. The man then assured that everything happened by accident. The third-level master was extremely dangerous, so only the use of magic could give a chance to win. The leader ordered to retreat, and the girl immediately asked why she was left alone in the branch. She did not understand why he had to use such a thing at all until the man had time to move away. Clea boldly cooked him, not at all afraid to blame that all this was done intentionally. The man was tired of listening to the girl's words, so he decided to act decisively. He went closer, grabbed her throat and pressed it against the wall. Clea began to breathe hard. It seemed that she was about to suffocate. However, Godai released her on time, and the girl fell to the ground. The man replied that even if it happened intentionally, no one dared to tell him a word, because for all this young man, only the one they support. The Playhot did not give up. She was aware that she was much weaker than this man, but strongly told him that if he did not stop, she would complain to the guild. The girl shouted that the actions of the commander would be regarded as imposing attacks on a member of the guild, which could lead to loss of adventure seeker status. In addition, if he tries to escape from the scene, he will be punished by law. Clea added that witnesses could confirm everything, but Gaudak wondered if she was sure that these people would actually help her. The assistant did not understand what he was in mind, so he looked around and looked at everyone who was around. The leader of the plan for the future noted that none of the team members confirmed the words of the girls, and so she began to ask why the boys did so. All team members looked very frightened. It was visible that they were afraid of Godok. The man explained that Kidcha just seems as if the guilt had disappeared due to his mistake. But anyone who hears her story thinks that it is only a girl who is not capable of anything. The man returned to the flag, reminding her of what situation she is in. After that, he sharply ordered the team to get out of the dungeons faster, so as not to waste time. The assistant was left in the same place, immersed in the idea that he could not help his friend. She remembered how bravely he fought and reproached for her own powerlessness. She could not even imagine that she could try to change something, for example, to reach out. But fear jumped her, and she did nothing. After a while, another participant of the detachment approached Clea, reached out to her and helped to get up. He asked her to rise so they could go as soon as possible. The man also added that if the girl leaves one in the maze, she will not survive. So he advised her to just listen and obey Godak. Claudege looked at Harland with despair. The assistant wondered why none of the audience wanted to help those who were unfairly sent to the right death. To this, Holland replied that for all members of the detachment there is only one person to whom they listen to, and this is a god. In their country there was only one team of the highest S-class, and therefore no one dared to interfere with its commander. The girl could not believe that people were able to forget about conscience. Holland explained that it is quite familiar. Everyone has their goals and moves to them. For example, he himself had to feed his family somehow. But Clea did not want to listen to it. The girl felt that she couldn't just leave everything as it was, even if no one was near. Seeing the expression of the assistant's face, her girlfriend gently added that nothing could be done. She understood herself, but did not want to confess to herself. The man explained to her that looking for a Gila alone is in vain, and advised not to worry. This happens quite often. Hodland also noted that with adventure seekers this happens quite often, so wonder nothing here. However, the girl was not going to put up with this situation. The man seems to have tried to calm down on his own, so he got a cigarette and smoked. At the same time, he repeated again that no one dare to talk about the bogs. Clea clenched his fists and firmly said that she did not want such a fate, because she became an adventure search for not to endure such trials. Goglin gently stroked the girl on her head, and she apologized to him for her excessive emotionality. Portland also asked the girl for not supporting her, confessing that he joined the detachment only for the sake of earnings. Subsequently, the detachment returned to the base. Clea did not leave Guild. The girl did not want to return to the team, but still understood. If she leaves, he would no longer be able to get to the maze of the highest level of complexity. Clack was aware that there was simply no strength to resist her. Time was pouring, as always. It has been 3 months from the moment the girdle disappeared into the dungeon, but the Clea did not seem. She trained hard to become stronger. The girl understood that the day would come when she again had to return to the same dungeon and find the way that would bring her to the right level. It is there that she will be able to find the one for whom she so carefully fought. Clea fought and kept with hope that Jill was alive, because if that is so, she would do her best to pull his up. After all, he did not have to disappear in this maze. Every day the girl ran to the dungeon so as not to lose the desire to get better. One day a carriage stopped at the entrance. It became clear that some noble came to the laboratory. However, later the girl noticed how people appeared in the armor near the carriage, and then she realized, in front of her was the Order of the Holy Knights. Clown did not understand why a military unit appeared in this place, which was subordinate directly to the church. Usually they obeyed the king's orders, so the girl suspected that something important happened. Subsequently, a woman passed a woman who suddenly called. The Holy Virgin turned to that man and quietly asked not to do so. The girl with long hair smiled and replied that it was not at all like a holiday, but it was her modesty that only emphasized her nobility and cordiality. Seeing the Holy Virgin, Clea was confused for a moment. She suddenly realized how huge her influence could be compared to her own. The girl mentioned the words of Godakakis. She is just an assistant who has nothing, who is not able to change injustice and cannot help those who need help. However, Clasha recalled Gil's words. She can choose a strategy that will help you achieve the desired result. It was these words that the young man became support for her, and she decided not to give up and do her best. The girl was well aware that she has not yet become a real adventure look and is not yet able to cope with difficulties. But Claus was convinced that if she leaves everything as he is, he would never forgive it. Therefore, gathering with the spirit, she went bravely to the knights and the Holy Virgin. Having apologized for the hassle, Kulka thought what words to pick up to ask for help and save the Gila. At the same time, a young man in the maze began to sneak creatures similar to wolves. There was still fish in their mouths, and they were not going to share the prey at all. However, the young man was not afraid of his rivals. He firmly clung to one of the creatures, showing that he would not retreat or give his prey. Jumping on one of those wolves, the young man forced him to surrender, and the other monsters, seeing it, rushed to the side so that the young man did not take them. Lying on the enemy's chest, the branch showed a sign of victory after such a short battle. But his behavior was strange, because he remained alone for a long time and almost did not communicate with other people. After calming down a little, the young man was strangely protected and rubbed his forehead. He was glad that he coped so quickly with those creatures that underestimated him. The young man looked at the defeated rival and told him that he has long been not an ordinary man. Now he is more like a gorilla from the human world because his power is compared only with truly strong. After a short silence, the guy wondered. 3 months have passed since he disappeared into the dungeon. It was indeed a long time. A little time passed, and the young man had already enjoyed a piece of meat that he managed to get. It was not easy to find food in such circumstances. The young man realized that he was on the verge of his capabilities, because it was incredibly difficult to survive alone. The fish he took away from the wolves turned out to be spoiled, but he was nowhere to look for. The guy was steadily stable, though he had almost nothing to survive, and it was not easy for him. One day, when Gil ate fish, he suddenly came across a crystal that could cost a whole fortune. Going to the board on which the guy was drawing a border to sway before him, the young man showed him a crystal. But soon he threw away that crystal because he realized that he was no use in the dungeon. Continuing to eat fish, the young man realized that if he continues to continue, he could go crazy because loneliness and lack of communication became unbearable. The branch for a moment thought that he may have already dead, but immediately rejected these thoughts because he could not afford to despair. The guy sincerely believed if you continue to go forward, he would definitely get to the surface. Turning to move on, the branch began to say goodbye to Gadaki's drawing, promising to meet him next time on the surface, because he was sure that he would soon get out of the maze. Gil came out of his temporary shelter and confidently moved forward. He did not know where this road would lead, but still it was better than staying still. Once a guy read a book in which people with topographic cretinism were divided into 2 types. The first type is those who, without any doubt, boldly go forward, even if he is lost, because they are confident in their actions, although they often get lost. The second type is uncertain people. They quickly panicked because of constant anxious thoughts that they got lost. Even when they walked the right road, they were afraid of fear, and they eventually chose the wrong direction. Gil attributed himself to this second type. Even while training with the mentor, the young man often confused directions, and it always caused a laugh at a man. He jokingly suffered a guy for his restless confusion. The guy considered himself a person of the second type, but understood well. If you panic, got lost even more. So the young man convinced himself carefully that he would never be lost again. However, as soon as the young man tied to the positive, his path suddenly began to go down, and at that moment the boy had doubts about his choice. Gilov seemed strange that he had always climbed up, but now the road suddenly drove down. But the guy did not even think of turning or retreating. The guy decided that from now on he would always go forward, whatever happened. Suddenly, a trap came under his feet. Whatever the branch did not convince himself that he was not one of those who did not understand the area. In fact, he belonged to another category. He did not think where he was going, but moving forward so confidently that he seemed as if he was known to him even in an unfamiliar place. The guy, not noticing the buttons under his foot, accidentally stepped on her. Immediately near him, a wave was approaching. The wave of water rapidly knocked the young man off his feet and picked up, carrying him in an unknown direction. The branch wanted to exclaim something from surprise, but could not say a word. As soon as the waves subsided, the branches grabbed the edge of the surface and began to cough, as the liquid that was swollen was swallowed. The young man was to get up to the thread and immediately noticed that the trap he got into was truly cunning. She did not attract attention at all. Feeling someone's presence, the guy realized the trap was arranged so as to lure the victim in the right place and then to attack. In order not to remain defenseless, the young man immediately grabbed his sword and boldly put him forward, preparing to strike an enemy. However, the guy did not immediately recognize who was standing before him because he had no glasses. Only when his vision cleared a little did he finally notice this person. A girl with long hair stood in front of a young man. She kept her own staff in her hands, but it was clear from her appearance that she was not going to attack him. At first, Jill looked at a man who suddenly appeared in front of her, and then the girl turned and saw another one that the wave brought to her. For a while, the young man could not believe that he did not think. Due to bad eyesight, he saw only a blurred figure, but gradually understood he faced not a monster, but a real person. The girl laughed quietly, confirmed that she was a man, and confessed that she was surprised because she did not look like others. Gil couldn't believe it was not a dream. He apologized for his reaction. The guy explained that he had lost his glasses and did not see what was before him. Deciding to check, the girl showed 4 fingers and asked how much the guy saw. He seriously replied that he sees as many as 38. Here, the girl finally realized how bad he had vision. The young man could not understand why, when he got into such a terrible trap, a terrible monster did not appear in front of him. Instead, he met a person. But as soon as the young man thought about it, a giant monster appeared next to the couple, reminiscent of a giant crab. When the creature spoke, the young man exhaled lightly, because he was convinced that a monster always appears after the trap. Sitting a little more, the girl again dared to say that she is a man. It seemed that the guy still couldn't believe it. Guild could not understand why the girl was so calm, because behind her back was a monster that he saw and heard even himself. The young man reached for his sword, preparing to protect her from the attack of the monster. The next moment, the young man exclaimed that he was going to use a hidden blade. Apparently, he wanted the girl to understand his intentions. A moment later, the young man struck a monster, cut it in half. Although the guy saw nothing, he fought skillfully and confidently. Due to the fact that the floor was completely in the water, Jill has swollen and fell. The girl immediately rushed to ask if everything was fine with him. The girl was amazed at how the guy coped with the monster so quickly, but much more worried her how he was feeling now. The guy grabbed her hands and exclaimed her that she was a real man. The tears of happiness shone on the young man's face. He has not communicated with people for a long time, so he felt so brightly and acutely. Touching the water with her palm, the girl suddenly realized, most likely it was about her. But the young man did not understand anything. The girl told that she had to only touch the liquid as she felt. She hid in a magical circle in her. The guy could not confirm her words, because he was a regular sword, and such things were not known to him. Raising up, the girl guessed that it was probably the water that brought her here, like her new friend. The couple managed to find a new cave. It turned out to be very large and spacious, and the ceiling rose high up. The young man wondered why the girl was in the dungeon. She said she came here with the holy knights to clear the maze. The branch suggested that now the girl got into the same situation as he was. The guy believed that the girl once fought with a third-level master, and then her girlfriend condemned her to death. However, the girl denied, they say, everything was not true. The girl replied that she just got into a trap that moved her to another place. She also noted that she did not come here, and, unlike her, the Holy Knights did their business without any mistake. Armed men took the girl to the 4th level, where no one has ever descended. After passing the corridor, she inadvertently stepped on a button, and at the same moment the trap worked. The young man was surprised to see that the girl came not with adventurers, but with knights. The interviewee hesitated a little, whether it was worth telling her everything in details. But after short thought, he decided to continue. It turned out that the girl was a researcher. Then Jill wondered if she wanted to go to the maze with him and the knights. She agreed with delight. 3 months ago, all the main churches began to insist that the ominous energy came from this prison. But the girl herself did not feel anything like this. The branch, deciding not to delay, appealed to his interlocutor to help him to wash, because for a long time he had no opportunity to clean himself. He suggested that the girl had the magic of purification because she was from the church. The girl herself wanted to offer it a boy, but did not dare. However, once he asked himself, she agreed, adding that he was really terribly stinking. The Holy Virgo replied that this happens here often. After all, there is nothing surprising in such a place. So she did not delay and hurry to fulfill Jill's request. The guy thought of what he was happy to meet this girl. After all, in just a few days she fell into his soul that he could already lose her head from her charm. Looking at his interlocutor, the guy only thought about how grateful to her for just finding herself at that moment. Thanks to the girl, the young man was circling on the spot, rejoicing what he is now. After a while, the girl wondered if there was no curse on the young man. This question was surprised by the interlocutor, because he did not expect it to notice it so quickly. The guy assured that he should not worry, because he already guessed how to get rid of the curse. He also praised the girl for her high level of magic, because she was able to feel that she was particularly vulnerable to her. The girl also noted that the guy was incredibly strong, because she was able to defeat such a huge monster as a water crab with one blow. The guy in response only sighed and said that the force is all he had. The virgin did not have time to say the words of her monsters again. The girl froze in place without even dare to move. Within a few seconds, something elusive at a frantic speed, and she didn't even have time to see what it was. The young man rescued his new girlfriend again, cutting down the monster in half. He did it so quickly that the girl did not even have time to blink. She suggested that the girl return to his base so they could talk quietly, and the interlocutor agreed. The guy thanked her for his trust. The young man confidently assured that he remembers the path well to the base, so they would soon get. The girl in response joked that she could no longer wait for the guy's hiding place. However, the joy did not last long, because the couple got to the shelter not in a few minutes, as it hoped, but only after 5 hours. During this time, people are tired. The girl complained that she had a lot of sore walking. The young man apologized, but did not find more words that he could justify himself. Sitting off the shore, the couple finally managed to take a breath and relax. At that moment, the girl finally decided to name her name. It turned out that the Holy Virgin is the name of Lelia, and she was a participant of the church. Realizing that her full name is a little long, Lilia decided to offer a few shorter options. To make it easier for the young man, the girl suggested to call her Lily or Leia, and if he wants, even Aunt Lee can turn. After the young man also named his name, the question raised in his head, why did this girl call Anna? Pointing to herself, Leia said she was 20 and she looks like a real adult. But the branch only sighed in response. He still couldn't see an adult in it, although he himself was 19. The guy tried to mention all the rules of communication with the elders, especially the respect for the authorities and his level in society. He asked Leia if he had to talk more respectfully, but she just smiled and assured that it was not necessary. The guy felt that he was wrong, but Lily only smiled and replied that she could be said in any way. How convenient for you. Hill was also going to tell what happened to him, but Leia interrupted him, noting that he already knew the general details because she was told everything. Before entering the maze, a girl with blonde hair approached her and asked to find Jill in the dungeon. The young man immediately realized that it was a Clea. The young man was glad that someone had mentioned him, because it had been so many months from his disappearance that he could seem as if Jill died. The young man was so happy that a tear was shining on his cheek, but the girl suddenly added that they were hoping to find at least his body, but it was not necessary to say that. On the other hand, all this made sense. The guy could not get out or somehow contact someone. But whatever happens, somewhere there, behind the door, was waiting for a man. Looking at the guy, Leia wondered how he managed to get so far, because at the 3rd level he disappeared without a trace. Since the couple has already got at least a 4th level, it is strange that Jill went down below. The guy explained that in fact he was first thrown down, that is, he found himself at the bottom of his own. This answer was very surprised by Lily. Gil added that he still does not understand Gadaki's motives. However, when the monster appeared, one of his team members hit him at the same time, and they flew to another level together. The guy wanted to get up, moving forward, but he was not sure whether he was doing. Day by day, the young man walked his way until he once fell into a trap that suddenly swept it off the road. So he met Lai. Seeing a human figure in front of him, the guy felt incredible joy, because a little more, and he would lose his mind. The girl was surprised when the guy compared himself with the mountain during the story, but he quickly explained that it was just a metaphor. Lily added that Jill's friend was just unbearable. Therefore, when they get out of here, it is sure to study it well. And now the boy should not worry. With him there will be Aunt Leia. The young man said that 3 months had passed since his disappearance. He hoped that he would soon be able to find a way out, and Leia suggested that he go up the stairs, as Jill did. However, the guy reminded them that they would soon have a meeting with the 4th level owner, who would have to fight. Lily did not understand what he was leading to. The monster patiently waited for those who dared to get to him. But there were very few desperate such as Branches and Lei. The young man stated that they would not be able to defeat this monster, because there are reasons that would interfere. Once upon a time, the young man had almost reached the next level, and suddenly he was interrupted by a terrible monster. For several days, the young man could not move out of place. He was unsuccessfully looking for a way to go further, because the monster was much stronger than him. But in reality, it would be more correct to say that this monster was not stronger, but rather stronger than the previous one, and that's what created additional difficulties for the Gil. The young man confessed that he could not strike the opponent because he does not see his weaknesses at all. He feared that any mistake could cost him a sword he would just break. Glasses could facilitate the situation, but the guy lost them for a long time. However, the branch stopped and added that it may be just his attempt to justify his own weakness. If the young man had a better sword, he would effortlessly cut the monster. Realizing this, he decided to train even more often, and stopped by the water to rest and restore strength. The girl was surprised that the guy at that moment thought about drinking water, and at the same time realized how bad he had vision. She lifted a little liquid on her palm, which Jill called water. Lily wondered if he was really sure that she was. Watching the fluid in the hand of his interlocutor, the young man doubted his own confidence, and Leia, noticing it, offered a new friend to cleanse the stomach with magic. When the guy offered to go to the boss, the young man replied that he had a sharp abdominal pain, and added that he could not fight until he was stronger. Lily assured that Jill could easily overcome the lord of this level, because she really was able and knows what he was doing. Lily added that she would be able to turn the young man into a real gorilla using the magic of strengthening, because she remembered his story. Та хлопець лише відповів, що це йому не допоможе. Leah was surprised, but Jill continued, explaining that she was holding back his true strength, because this cheap sword would not withstand his power. The girl thought that the young man just boasts in front of her. He was too proud of his power. However, the guy immediately denied it and assured that everything was not at all as it seemed. In fact, any sword will break if you thoughtlessly apply force. Therefore, the main thing is to always have something to replace weapons. when the previous sword of the young man split. He hesitated for a long time and just bought himself a new one. To get into the right place, it was also necessary to aim correctly, which became a real call without glasses. After the boy's words, the girl decided to ask him a question. Leo wondered how many times the young man would have to hit the monster to win him. When a short silence reigned, the branch calmly replied that he would have only one blow. Looking at the interlocutor directly into the eyes, the guy made it clear. He is quite serious. Without any smile, he said that if he hit full force, he would immediately spread the 4th level. Lily perceived such a statement surprisingly calmly, and at first even did not answer anything. Subsequently, she noted that the young man was very confident, to which he replied that he was guided only by his own experience. However, inside he was still afraid that he could break his only sword. If the young man lost his weapon, he will no longer be able to move through the dungeon. The girl was well aware of it. Touching the sword, Clea said she would give the guy a small head start to hit the monster not one, but even twice. Lily took advantage of her magic and put the magic on the sword, turning it into an extremely powerful and unbreakable magical weapon. Returning the sword to the young man, the guy noticed that he was illuminated by a strange light. Then the girl smiled and explained that she put a magic on the weapon. Hill was surprised because Clea repeated the words from the sacred letter of Sweeta's teaching. Clea replied that she remembered them when she read this book in class. Although Jill's sword was not sacred, he still became much stronger. The young man sincerely thanked Lei and added that now she was guilty of the service, what Lily cheered. She smiled in response. The girl wished the boy good luck in the battle, and he would surely promise that he would certainly win. It was about 10 minutes left to the place where the monster was waiting for, but the girl knew from her own experience it would take a little more time. After 3 hours, the couple finally got to the right place. The young man once again apologized to them for staying, though he had been here before. After examining the gate, Clea was relieved and asked if she could go. The branch smiled at this and replied that he was ready for battle. Putting his palms on the gate, the young man strongly pushed them, and they opened it, passing this pair inside. Crossing the gate, Clea and Jill felt the eerie energy enveloped. But it was only the first of the trials awaiting ahead. The two heroes suddenly emerged. A giant monster looks like a moose with a threatening muzzle. But despite this, none of them was scared. The monster has grown. Threateningly raising his voice, the young man strongly stated that he would be attacked directly to his forehead, even if it is very risky. Despite the loss of vision, he was not going to retreat. The guy grabbed the sword from the vagina. He looked at the monster and shouted to him that he would destroy him. Clea looked carefully at the monster in front of her and decided that it was probably the same nightmare from the Apocrypha she once read. A little time passed, and the creature began to do something strange with its horns. They were slowly approaching each other until they seemed to stick together. Having 2 horns that merged into one, the monster rushed directly at the young man. However, the guy did not stay still. He rushed forward towards the threatening enemy. The weapon that barely kept the heap, the young man pushed and jumped forward, straight into the enemy. For the next moment, the horns that were connected to each other to aggravate the impact suddenly began to crack and break up. The branch was able to defeat the owner of the 4th level with only one blow. Running from the body of the fallen monster, the young man confessed to himself. He still needs to learn a lot. Looking back, the young man glanced at the one who could not win before, and a relief appeared on his face. Exhaled, the guy heard the applause. The girl praised him, wondered if everything was fine, and added that everything turned out even better than she expected. The branch replied that everything went well, though it seemed strange to him. Earlier, when he tried this technique, his swords could not stand and break. Remembering his past, the guy could not remember how many weapons had already changed. Instead, Clea just knew one thing. She should be useful and help him. Looking at the girl, the young man thought that she was far as simple as it seems. Her magic was extremely powerful, so he realized that she could not be a regular church maid. Clea was stronger than any priest, so he decided that she was about at the level of the archbishop or even cardinal, although he had never seen such high-ranking people. Recalling a recent conversation about age, the guy was convinced that the girl was much older than 20 years, because she seemed extremely skillful. Gil suggested that he may not be a girl, but a grandmother, who has been exceeding all expectations for many years, and her life experience. Looking again at his friend, the young man tried to get rid of these thoughts, but at heart he understood. All this could be true. Having spent 3 months in the dungeon, the guy suddenly realized that he could be wrong in many things, and this discovery caused tears on his face. Feeling the emotions again taking the mountain, the branch tried to calm down and realized that he simply allowed the foolish thoughts to fill his head. Clea approached the monster and asked the man who he was. The young man replied that he could not see her because he had very bad eyesight. Recalling the appearance of the monster, The girl tried to understand which animal it looked the most. Lei was overwhelmed by thoughts, and she, as if moving away from all around, completely lost their connection with reality. But later she came to mind and understood. Lily thought that the monster seemed like a horse, because he had 4 legs, although it was only her guess. Everything was far from easy, but Leah decided not to get hung up on it. Rejecting unnecessary thoughts, she stopped on her feet and shook dust from her clothes. Looking at the gates, which were now left without security, the girl pointed to them and assured that they could now pass. The young man was in no hurry and decided to share the important news from Lily before they went on a trip further. The branch looked at his companion and confessed that he was not at all focused on the area. The girl did not immediately realize what he means. The young man lowered his head and quietly added that he was not sure whether they would really be waiting for this door. Jill also stressed that if she suddenly feels that they were not going there, he should say it right away. But in these words, the girl interrupted her. Lily accepted the promise of the young man and, smiling, replied that everything would be fine, because they would always be able to decide where to go. Leah added that Jill could safely rely on her aunt because she always with pleasure exploring new places. The young man, hearing it, looked surprised. He did not expect such an answer. The girl continued her story. Since she rarely leaves home, she enjoys studying atlases to learn about new places. Leah was very lazy because she loved to sit at home and not go anywhere. However, she really liked reading traveling notes and all kinds of adventure guides. After pointing to herself, Leah confidently said that she would be a captain in their journey, so the boy should not worry about what was next. The young man worried, but still decided to accept everything as the girl said, because it was so easier for him. One day, the mentor of Jill insidiously lured him to a ship that was suddenly attacked by the monsters. I had to go into battle. But even in the midst of chaos, the guy was able to find peace. Choosing the direction of movement, the couple went forward, because both mentally reached the same solution. Jill and Leah were similar to not even stopped in difficult circumstances. They were confidently moving forward, believing that they chose the right path. Their combat power has doubled. In addition, when they were together, the spirit of the team only strengthened, and this significantly increased their chances of winning. So, in a month, the couple managed to descend to the 5th level of the dungeon. The path was difficult, but nothing could break the will of those who sought to survive and break free. Subsequently, the couple was in a tunnel. The guy walked in front, pulling something that Lily sat on. This design allowed the girl not to walk on her own, but it was evident that the guy was not delighted with such developments. Looking up, the girl was surprised that for unclear reasons they still could not get to the surface. It seemed very strange to her. The branch was breathing hard, so I asked if it was difficult for him to take her to the cart, because they have been on the road for so long. The guy replied that everything was fine. For him, it was a great exercise, to carry a trolley in which a person sits. The girl turned to the interlocutor and asked if she was difficult for him. The branch was silent, and it was a little angry. However, the guy later confessed that in fact he was a bad workout for him. With every minute, he felt he had a decrease in his strength. The girl laughed at joy. She was waiting for such an answer, and it was very pleased. Leah decided to point out that the maze is very deep, because it seems that they have risen up all this time. She thought the holy knight she said goodbye to. Lily really wanted to apologize to the people in armor, because she disappeared so suddenly that it seemed as if they were angry with her. It took a while, and the young man could no longer remain silent. The young man stopped and said quietly that he has long had one idea that both of them should finally recognize. Leah did not understand what the guy meant, because he never expressed his thoughts directly. The branch, having a little rest and gathering with the forces, finally decided to say everything as it was. Sleeping her eyes, the young man said that the girl herself had to guess. They got lost. Leah turned and looked at her companion. Lily did not seem worried at all, as if everything was fine. But Jill, on the contrary, looked very excited. The man continued and added that they were going on for too long, because he could not fall so deeply that he would not spill on the surface in 4 months. Lily tried to reassure Gil, but he didn't even listen to her. The guy said they had to admit. It seems that all this time they were not moving there, so they could not find a way out. The girl looked at the interlocutor and closed her eyes for a moment. And later, she said that the guy himself does not understand what was happening to him. Leah added that people who are poorly focused on the terrain are divided into 2 types. The guy heard about it before, but could not understand what Lily was leading. The girl smiled, looking at the lost boy, and then raising her hand, pointed to him and decided to explain something. The first type of people is those who really get out of the right path, but it is definitely not about Gila, even if he did not believe it. The girl continued the story, explaining that they always chose the road, guided only by intuition. However, often their thoughts coincided, and the guy confirmed that this happened every time. Clea added that it could not be such that two people constantly choose the wrong way at the same time, because the likelihood that both at the same time such a bad landmark in space at the same time is too small. The branch was in despair, because it seemed to him that they were in this likelihood. Clea also started talking about the second type that is not focused on the terrain. She reminded that these people initially walked the right road, but reached the middle of the way, doubted and turned in the wrong way. The young man suddenly realized that he had recently tried to do something similar. Then the girl calmly explained to him that he had already started to forget. Leo Watt bypassed Gila and said that one way or another everything happened. The main thing is to go to the end, then everything is sure to succeed. The guy was hesitant, because he could happen that when they came to the end, they would not find anything. Leah reached out to the boy, helping him to get up. Lily replied that in this case, they would not have a different choice, but to go back and try to find a new way to exit. The girl spoke with such confidence that the guy could not even doubt. He smiled and finally calmed down. However, the couple's conversation suddenly interrupted the monster that appeared from nowhere. The girl was not scared at all, only angry because the monster stole her transport. The young man turned sharply and with one powerful blow again crushed a huge monster, cutting it in half. Jill, remembering the words of the interlocutor, thought only that she was right, and it helped him not lose his mind in this difficult situation. When the guy quickly won, what Leah had no doubt, she began to applaud to celebrate the young man. Together, they had already overcome 120 levels, so there was no point in going back. Leah wondered if the branch was feeling better, and he nodded in response. The young man bowed to Leah and thanked her, because it was thanks to her experience that he understood a lot. The girl knew exactly how to act at the right moment. Lily smiled and said that the boy should have time to learn from her while she was alive. The branch smiled cheerfully in response and agreed with her nod. It passed for a while, and the couple found themselves in a strange tunnel. But soon a development came before them. They had to choose again where to move on. Looking one way, Jill and Lily agreed with each other and decided to move to the right. The thoughts of the boy and the girl were completely coinciding, and this meant only one thing. They have no doubt chose the right path. Just as the couple together and without hesitation chose the right path, the guy found a new way of movement and pulled behind a girl who stubbornly did not want to walk. The couple rushed forward, forgetting all the doubts. The path they chosen went down into the dark depths, and it could only mean one thing. Their great adventure just started. After a while, Jill and Leah decided to take a break and eat. They eaten the fish and washed it with clean water. The food did not last long because the couple was well aware. It was impossible to waste time, because they have been in the dungeon for too long, looking for at least the slightest chance to get out. Lily ate fish, trying not to twist from unpleasant feelings. She grunted that this dish was so disgusting that they were about to cry. The young man has long been accustomed to such life, and sincerely rejoiced in the fact that he had to eat and drink. He also noticed that he could now be saturated and felt full of strength. With the advent of Lelia, the boy had pure water and perfect cleanliness. Although they both failed to light a fire, even in such a hardship, their standard of living became a little better. After they thanked each other for lunch, Lily asked Gila to reach her hands. The guy fulfilled the request without even asking why. With the help of water force, the girl easily washed away the dirt from the boy's palms. List smiled and released his hands. The young man thanked the girl for his care, and she smiled in response and said that she was quite easy. Just wants to sleep now. The branch replied that he would go to train, because he still needs to learn a lot. The young man added that through the owners of the levels it is not easy to pass the floors, so he should learn how to overcome these difficulties without asking the girl for help. Leah stared at the young man, and only in a moment did he realize that she believed as if he was disturbing him. Lily began to doubt whether she had helped the young man enough, and it seemed that she may have done something wrong. She did not give her the idea that instead of help, she only interferes with the guy. However, he hurried to reassure her. In fact, everything was completely different. The girl also remembered how she studied special spells that were beneficial to many people. She kept a liquid in her palm that the guy had confused with water before. Without hesitation, she suggested that he drink it as he is, without any cleaning. The branch tried to explain that he simply does not want to constantly rely on someone else's help, because he needs to work more on his own skills. The young man also added that every sword who wants to become better thinks the same way. After all, he said, true power can only be gained by their own efforts, not relying on someone's help. When Jill finished, Leia just smiled and said that it was just a joking answer, because she understands why the boys did so and did not keep him evil at all. The young man exhaled with relief, and the girl suddenly called him a sweetheart. According to the guy, his mentor immediately fell, who, on the contrary, always reproached him for his extra self-confidence. Lily, meanwhile, reminded Jill to turn to her without unnecessary formalities. She liked more. The girl confessed that she likes to tease the boys who younger than her. However, she quickly calmed down and reminded herself that she was already going to sleep. She wished her good night to say goodbye. When Leia began to go to sleep, the young man left her in the repository, and he went the other way to start his workout. Walking on the road, Gil shared that he had difficulty with Lily. She constantly charming over him and does not take it seriously. After a safe distance, the guy thought he had a lot of trouble, and even more thoughts about a new friend. However, the main thing was that the guy already understood. Very soon, most likely, he fell in love with Lily. And this thought immediately flashed on him on his cheeks with a blush. Because she was nearby, the guy could not focus on training. He increasingly caught himself thinking that he began to sympathize with Leah. Remembering the advice of his mentor, the guy remembered how he always said to stay away from women. The mentor has been divorced 5 times, so he tried it from his own bitter experience. 5 years ago, when he heard these words, the young man just smiled. He did not believe a man who had undergone a divorce. At the moment when Jill expressed his doubts, the mentor gave him the most difficult task, because the guy had to obey his orders. Recalling the words of that man, the young man really began to avoid relationships with women. However, he understood that he could not last forever. 3 months of loneliness in the confused corridors of dangerous dungeons and wandering in unbearably dirty conditions seemed to the boy whole eternity. And now, when he almost lost hope, suddenly met a girl who seemed like a real ray of light in his eyes. Having lived all the month alone with Leah in such a place, the young man suddenly noticed that she began to like him. He couldn't do anything with it, because the young man never felt anything like this, and the master expressed his opinion. When the man damaged his back and could no longer be Gil's guardian, he advised him to go on his own. When the guy went on the road himself, everyone around immediately decided that he was a student of his master. Unfortunately, there was nothing good for him. When people learned that the branch was going to kill a dragon, everyone wanted to make sure that he was really capable. Because of this, the guy often fought on duels, showing everyone his skill. So he found new friends, but over time, each of them still went from his life. Recalling the past, the young man realized that he had simply not had a chance for a happy future. But no matter what, he did not lower his hands. Leah always took Jill by the hand after he was eating, and at that moment his heart began to push. After that, Lily also smiled. To calm down, the young man sat in meditation. Thanks to the protective barrier created by the girl, the dragons could not approach them, so a great opportunity to train without any obstacles opened. However, the guy could not get rid of the idea that if he declared Lily in such a tense atmosphere, it would look quite inappropriate. Imaging a similar situation, the guy suddenly realized that he would not really leave the girl any choice, and would behave like a real villain. This awareness made him drive away such thoughts as far as possible. The branch believed that after leaving the dungeon, he would be able to keep in touch with Leah, and a year later he will dare to confess to her in her feelings. Turning into meditation, the young man sought to expand the inner force that filled every corner of his body. He wanted this power to wrap it entirely, not depressing, but on the contrary, exacerbating and hovering their properties. However, the guy thought again. Suddenly this girl has been about 80 years old? She looked exactly older than 20. The highest power was achieved at adulthood, so the girl could not be so skilled in 20. The guy did not look at her face because he had a weak vision. Leah took Jill's hands only to clean them with a spell. She showed no interest in him. The young man was so desperate that he had already resigned with the future refusal before he confessed to his feelings. A tear appeared on his cheek. However, suddenly Lily appeared behind the guy who approached him, but because of his thoughtfulness, he did not notice it. Suddenly, the guy shouted, and later apologized for the noise. Leah also told that she woke up and thought that maybe the boy was cold. The girl approached the young man and directed magic in his direction. But Jill, as it usually was, did not influence any action this time. Smiling, Leah sat next to him and began to impose a charming spell that protected the person from the cold. When she graduated, Lily noted that she would be enough for 10 hours, so she advised the boy not to strain and go to bed as soon as possible. When the girl was about to go, the branch did not resist, and asked why she didn't need to touch his hands this time to apply magic. The girl replied that she was able to use this power even without physical contact with a person. This was possible due to its special ability. After the farewell, Lily went away, and the guy remained confused. He could not understand why the girl touched him, if she didn't need it at all. Recalling all the conversations and meetings with Lai, Guild could not understand what to think of a girl now. She behaved so strange that she knocked him out of the panther. Watching Lai, the young man clenched his fists, because his body began to tremble, and alarming questions were raised in his head. The young man wondered if Lily was indeed an old woman. but she was surprised to realize that this question is worried less and less every time. The girl was squeezed. She clearly remembered the face of her rescuer, and the thoughts of what happened to Gil then did not give her rest. She could not imagine that such a young man could happen to this young man. Before her eyes, he just fell down, and she just cried, because she could not help him at that moment. Recalling the voice of a young man who called her name, the girl opened her eyes sharply and woke up in her bed. Realizing that she had a fatal day again, the girl felt that even 4 months later she still accuses herself of her own helplessness. After the detachment returned from the dungeon, nothing has changed in the life of Clea, and no news appeared from the Holy Knight detachment. Running past the house, the girl remembered the boy, but it seemed to her that it was only a dream. Allegedly, nothing happened to the young man in a tangled maze. Clea seemed to be stuck in a long and horrible dream that only she was remembered. Every day, her life was repeated as if under a copy, and only nature around hinted that autumn was gradually coming to an end. As soon as Clea took pause in her detentions, she heard someone calling her named, and immediately got up to look at that man. It turned out that Hamblin stood very close to the flag, who waved his hand as a sign of greeting. The girl wondered why the man was here, and he replied that he was just walking with the children. Because the children asked their father to go with them, he went out. But they need a little. After passing about half a road, the children lagged behind the man, and then he decided to wait for them in one place. She grabbed a pillow, put her on a bench, sat down to relax, and the girl, in the meantime, began to knead to warm up the muscles. When she finished, the claw did not look tired, as if it were all a common thing for her, but her husband was yawning because he never got some sleep. Praising the girl for his excellent physical form, the man asked how she was doing. Clea replied to this that it usually runs daily for about an hour. The girl also said that she performed 5 approaches 10 times, changing the distance and never looking for easy ways. Every day she changed the training program a little. For example, instead of strength exercises, could do endurance exercises, climbing the mountain. Hulleton smiled and said that the girl would definitely be a good adventure look. However, he may not have been to whom such words would like to hear. Kikaha was a little confused and replied that it was not true. The man still added that there is no need to exhaust himself with work, and if you get sick, you can always go to church and cure, but you should not abuse it. As soon as Huladus remembered the priests, he drove through the people, which most likely belonged to the church. The man explained that the followers of the church are always waking up very early, because in the morning they should take care of ordinary people. Clash is well understood. It seemed that Holland wanted to add something else, but for a moment paused, smoked a cigarette and thoughtfully thought, picking up words. Sighing, the man said that everyone had already learned. The supporters of the church were interested in dungeons, in which the sense of guilt disappeared. Luxury carriages almost never appeared on the streets near the dungeons, but about a month ago they began to notice more and more. Clark replied that when she saw the men in the armor, they did not introduce themselves to the servants of the church, so she decided that she was just knights. The man, in turn, noted that he did not even know that the church had such people. The holy knights did not look like those who do something dangerous, so no one understood why they came. Halen expressed his hope that the affairs of the church would not affect ordinary people, as it could be a danger to them. As soon as Klausha was going to tell the Holland about her act, as she did not have time to say, the children of the man have already ran to them. The guy and the girl were terribly tired, almost did not leave the strength, so they began to complain that their father was moving too quickly. The man laughed well and began to encourage his children, because they still coped with the task. Turning to Vicky, Galen shared that he has not left fear of everything bright and correct lately. Stitching his daughter on the head, the man confessed that he has long been feeling everything around him lost any meaning. But after his words, the man added that the girl should not be taken too seriously. He wished her to train hard, because she was convinced that she would definitely work. Crossing her hands behind her back, Kika thanked the shaved for the warm words and promised that she would definitely try. For a while, a cat came to the girl at night. Clave Ha was surprised, but still opened the door to see who came to her. It was in front of her Arlene, the holy knight of the church. The girl apologized for her late visit and went to the house. The knight thanked Clafas for her hospitality and fragrant tea. The blonde sat next to him, smiling quietly. The girls fell silent for a short time, and silence reigned in the house. It seemed that the knight was holding my breath, as if going to share her secret. Claval remembered that she had already seen Arlinea. She was near Lilia and worried about her, but she never understood why she came. Finally that night, she confessed that she wanted to know what happened to the future plan in the dungeon 4 months ago. Arlena said that the group refused to pass a heavy maze, in which no person was able to get out. But in reality, it was not true. Halaho's bug has already heard something about it, but did not want to believe what heard. That night, she turned to Godka to ask him about the details of that day. However, the man did not explain anything and only briefly said that his group would not pass the dungeon. Then Arlene decided to turn to Kulch. The night was very interesting why the leader of the highest rank group so calmly refused to go to the dungeon on the first attempt. Also, a girl with dark hair added that Gudaha assured her nothing happened in the dungeon and no one was injured. Hearing this, the flak frozen in place. The man also said that there were errors in the registration lists, so no one knew what happened to the Guel, because he was not mentioned in any group. Arlene added that she did not understand what the reasons of Godka refused to study. Clea realized that Godaha had achieved his goal by getting rid of Gila, so he no longer wanted to continue the study. It turned out that the man intended to kill a young man from the very beginning, but the girl did not understand the most important. Why did it happen? Remembering the expression of the face of Gothaz, Kaz felt a true horror from his treachery. When Arlene noticed how the girl tightened, she immediately turned to her. Claudia wondered whether it was worth telling the truth, so she carefully asked if Arlene had happened to deal with something strange in the dungeons. The knight replied that one of the four saints, Lily, disappeared in the maze through a trap that moved it to another place. Clea immediately recognized her. They already communicated before, even before the entrance to the dungeon. Arlenade also guessed that something was clearly wrong with the maze. In the dungeon, the Virgin tried to find out where the brothers came from, so the Holy Knights were particularly alert. But even their vigilance did not help when Lily disappeared. It is also strange that the trap worked just when the Holy Virgo stepped on her. The trap was designed to work only when a certain object appeared, but Klaug still did not even hear about it, because she could not imagine that there were such complex mechanisms. It was hard to believe that the trap was only on certain people. However, Arlen knew it sounded that way. The knight replied that it was impossible to warn mistakes, that difficult to find an explanation. That is why there were doubts. This maze is not so simple. Arlen again appealed to Flahau to tell in detail that day in the dungeon seemed suspicious or unusual. All participants of the group were silent, so only Clash could tell what happened that day. This did not give her rest. Arlen remembered how that girl begged her to save someone, or at least find her body when she talked to Lily. The knight did not retreat and demanded to know the truth, so Clea gradually began to remember all the events that had happened to him. Looking at her companion, Chloe Goss detained her gaze as if trying to gather thoughts. She was aware that she had a chance to change everything again. Subsequently, the girl went to a snack to one of the establishments near her home. On that day, she met a man who seemed very pretty, though she had no idea who he was. The young man had gorgeous dark hair and beautiful eyelashes, but it was difficult to understand whether it was a guy or perhaps a girl. The man stopped in front of the desk behind which was sitting. At first he was silent, but later spoke louder. The girl did not know how to behave, but as soon as the guy asked her to sit next, she silently moved and agreed. Having apologized for the inconvenience, the man began to flip out the menu, and the clique, meanwhile, ate his dinner silently, losing his own thoughts and guesses. Looking at the stranger, Klaka remembered Arlena, who once approached her, and noted that this girl was surprisingly pretty. A little time passed, and the young man who was sitting next to the girl decided to turn to her, distracting her from thought. Going even closer, the stranger began to think about which dish was considered the most delicious. Cleo replied that for the first time those who came here, it is best to choose a steak from the cutlets, because it is a corporate dish of this place. The young man wondered what the girl would advise him if he did not visit the institution for the first time. I could not get rid of the idea that the man who turned to her was somehow strange. The girl thought for a moment and then replied that all the meat dishes are very tasty. Since a corporate dish consisted of 3 steaks and a generous portion of rice, such food would be enough to be saturated with anyone. However, looking at the guy, Klaukawa added that for the one who was used to eating little, the portion would seem too big. But this fact did not embarrass the stranger at all. After listening to the girl, the young man replied with delight that he would very much like to taste the corporate dish, so he immediately called the waiter. The guy did not wait for someone to approach him, so he immediately said he wanted to order 2 branded dishes for himself. The girl who took the order was stunned by the herd, and for the owners of the establishment this order became a real call. Since even the most earned person was enough one serving, the owners were sure that this huge dish for the visitor would definitely be too much. Having quickly prepared 2 large portions, the man invested all his strength to make sure that rumors about a corporate dish. Claw Hud tried to warn that if someone orders dishes and then he did not eat them, the owners became very angry, but she did not have time to say it. 2 huge portions of branded dishes were brought to the table behind which the couple sat. The rice bowl was so large that it would be enough for a whole team of workers, but the young man did not bother it at all. He smiled and glad that everything was prepared for him so quickly. The owners were convinced that no one would overcome 2 large portions. Kalha, noticing their size, began to worry about a stranger. Not waiting for the guy to admit his guilt, the owners began to disperse. But the young man suddenly raised his voice. He turned to the scream and assured her not to worry about him, because in his desire he was not mistaken. Taking the sticks in his hands, the young man smiled and was ready to eat everything that was before him. All visitors to the institution were enthusiastically watched by this sight. No one could think that a skinny young man would be able to eat so much food. When he was eating, the guy sincerely confessed that the corporate dish was really delicious, and then the owners of the establishment recognized their mistake. After the guy ordered another portion of noodles, he asked why the girl almost did not eat. In response, she smiled slightly and said that she just had no appetite. The young man stood up, was going to go, and suddenly said Clea that she did not seem a bad person. Such words were quite surprised by the girl. However, the stranger said nothing more, just smiling mysteriously, looking carefully at the blonde girl. "Thank you for a great advice for a delicious meal." The young man left the money on the table and hurried to the exit. Departing, the young man smiled again and promised that he would do everything he needed without sparing strength. The guy gently holds the fingers of a smiling girl in his hand, but suddenly something attracts his attention. He looks back. They sit together in a cave, settling on a large flat stone. They are suitable for a guy in a jacket with long black hair and a smile on his face. He looks at them and is welcome. The girl says he is a man, and the guy is wondering how he could find himself here. Apparently, he also got lost. The girl thinks this guy is good. The guy does not believe in what is happening and says that it is simply impossible. And the stranger in response asks them not to worry. Smiling, he touches his forehead with one hand, and the other gesture welcomes them. He calls his name, Eunice, and he assures that he does not have any suspicious intentions. The guy and the girl silently watch him. Then the guy voices his suspicions, and the girl agrees with him. Eunice only looks at them with surprise, not understanding what is happening. All three sat around the campfire when the young man suddenly turned to the main character. Is it true that he broke his glasses and now does not see the face around? The guy confirmed this, that the young man only nodded, they say. Then it is not surprising that he did not recognize him. The fire of friendship is still burning. The protagonist, along with the girl, stand nearby, not looking away from the bright flame. They both repeat the word fire several times, and then the girl returns to Jill, calling him by his name, and asks what she wants from him. The girl smiles at the Gill and reports that a flame has finally appeared in their little shelter. The protagonist clamps his nose, and then a smile exclaims that it is incredible happiness, and then begins to laugh. Jill confesses that he had not felt so happy for a long time. The girl laughed and said she was with her for the first time. After that, they both exploded with a ringing laughter. Eunice smiles, looking at a fun company, and suddenly extends his hand to them, mysteriously showing the gesture of stop. He looks like Jill, and a girl go to bed. Eunice asks them to wait a little while he finishes his business, and then go to rest. The girl notes that the fire can go out. But Eunice only smiles and assures that he can light up a new moment for them. Eunice rises thoughtfully, holding his hand behind his chin. Suddenly a spark appears in his eyes. He came up with an interesting idea and turns to the boys, asking what they think about it. The boys continued to watch him, lying down. Meanwhile, Eunice began to talk about the chicken. He was from the group Plan of the Future, and at the same time the captain of the 4th Detachment of the Holy Knights Arlena. Jill and the girl sat side by side. The girl asked Eunice with interest where he knew the name of that station. Eunice smiled cunningly and asked if they were really so interested in him. He smiled with his smile to his chest and tells himself, his name is Eunice, and he is the supreme magician of stars, who always acted on his own. The boys look at the young man in surprise. Jill is interested in Archimag again, and the girl asks whether he gained glory because he became the youngest Archmage in history. Eunice confirms that everything is that way. The protagonist confesses that a little stunned. Eunice adds that because they were about the same age, he thought they would be familiar with much closer. Eunice looks carefully at the guy and says it is the famous fighter of poisonous dragons, Jill. Then the guy looks at the girl and tells her that she is a holiday that saves the islands, Lily. Jill and Lily look at the guy silently. Then their views occur, and they show almost simultaneously on each other with their fingers. Jill is interested in, and who of us is the holidays? And Lily asks, and who among us is a big killer? Eunice does not look away from them. Show something with your fingers. Then she smiles again and looks at them with a silent question in the look. He is amazed. How did it happen that, having spent so much time together, they still know nothing about each other? He asks what they did all these days. Jill thought for a moment and then told that they were just fishing. She also remembered how they drank delicious water and fought on their fingers. Eunice looked at Jill and Lily, this time without a smile. Suddenly his face shone with a smile, and he had fun that it sounds interesting. At this point, the protagonist calls him a weirdo. Jules asks Eunice how he got here. Eunice in response notes that he got much easier than them. He remembers how he put his hand on the drawing scheme. He explains that he used the same magical circle with which he moved the Holy Lily here from the 4th floor, and then just walked on the trail. Lily is genuinely surprised by the herd. Eunice looked at the boys, pointing at them, and said that he should be surprised in their place, not them. They realized that they did not just survive enough, and only together they managed to go down to such depth. Jill and Lily listened to him silently as if thinking about these words. The incensed notes that all the rumors of their incredible power seemed to be true. Lily, holding his head, laughs in response. The protagonist looks at the girl, and then raises her head up, saying only one letter. B. The girl looks at him in surprise, as if trying to understand what it means. Jill screams and asks the girl with despair whether he sees what was happening, and adds that he always knew. They were in a difficult situation. Lilia looks silently at the guy with distrust. She tells him that it should be perceived as a very valuable experience. Jill asks with interest whether she is now going to use this situation against him. Lily fades, looks at the guy confusedly, not finding words. But in the end, she still gets courage and begins a conversation with him. She reminds him that he agreed with everything, so the fault lies not only on it. Her words sharply pierce his heart. Lilia says everyone should be responsible for their actions. However, words continue to hurt God. The protagonist is already lying on the ground, and Lily silently watches him. Then the guy apologizes to her and recognizes that she was right. Lilius calmly replies that's so much better. Lying on the ground, the main character reflects. He was the first to make a mistake. He remembers how he held a round stone with Lily. They are both equally involved in what are here. However, everything that happened earlier was completely his fault. Now he just thinks what will happen if Lilia recalls. If the Lily remembers it, then the main character will probably have to be pleading on his knees. Now the girl thought about something. Lily remembers everything and looks at the Gila, reminding him that he was the first to go in the wrong direction. But the guy interrupts her, exclaims Eunice, and asks if he came to save them. He confidently replies that yes, but begins to deny. Eunice said that he thought at first. They just came across a boss, which was much higher, which is why they could not win him. Because of this, the group was in a disadvantage. He could not imagine that he would have to meet such a strong enemy so deeply. He asks them not to tell anyone that they wanted to clear this dungeon on their own, but Jill immediately denies it. Eunice smiles and confesses that he is even a little ashamed to admit his mistake. At this point, Jill screams again, denying everything he says. Eunice looks stunning at the main character lying on the earth, and confesses to him that they did not want it. Jill, with tears in his eyes, begins to talk about the direction, and Eunice asks him again. Then Jill confesses that they are in fact just topographic criticism. Lily stands quietly behind. But Eunice looks at the boys with complete misunderstanding, spreading his hands to the sides. After that, he asks them what it is at all. Jill, leaning his hands on the ground, says that all this time they just tried to get out, but instead went deeper and deeper. He clumsily looks away and asks if it is funny. Asks not to laugh. In fact, he would not like it. But the girl suddenly laughs at the full voice, and then the boy shrugged that he was not talking about it for her. The young man looks at the guys silently, and then Jill turns to him. The protagonist apologizes, adding that he was all an interesting coincidence. The guy realized that both of them seem to be constantly lost because they have a terrible sense of orientation in space. Jill claims that it is, but Eunice went here himself. Eunice only smiles and looks at the guy silently. The protagonist asks to stop because he has an alarming anticipation. The young man replies that this does not concern the case, but confesses that both know them. He remembers the dragon and tells how the hero martyr won the poisonous dragon, who kept in the fear of the country of the east after trying to poison the whole forest. He also remembers Lily, a holiday that saved the whole island from flooding. Eunice recalls how huge waves of water covered everything around, and says that she then created a powerful barrier to protect everyone from a frantic storm. Lilia adds that at that moment her mentor was near her. Jill confesses that he was helped by the residents of the island. Eunice says with interest she really wants to know if these people know something about him. He still holds his finger aimed at them. Lilia thinks and says that he is somehow related to the stars. The protagonist adds that, as far as he remembers, Eunice is the youngest Archimag in history, and that is all he knows. Lilia thought and asked Eunice whether he did not create. There was some new kind of magic or something like that. The guy smiled and confirmed that she guessed. He holds his finger in the air, and immediately a mysterious pattern appears. To create a new kind of magic, You need to meet several special requirements, although none of them are aware of it. However, it will be enough for all present to truly surprise them. Junie sits on her knees. Arcuate patterns appear around. He thinks of how to explain it all. Patterns were built into circles. If Junis was as modest as they were, he would have admitted that he only got so far through meeting his teacher in the past. Now it seemed to him that these people could tell him that the main thing was, but their response was suddenly interrupted. The main character exclaims the boy's name. He looks at him with surprise and asks if he can help something, because he does not understand what Eunice says. Eunice says that everything will be easier now. His magic draws power from stars. The protagonist reacts dissatisfied to it. Eunice tells with a smile that they realized. He belongs to a few who has a proud title of Archimag. Even here, in a place where the light does not reach the stars, it is still capable of using its power to some extent. The protagonist looks at him silently, trying to understand the meaning of his words, and Eunice watches him with a slight smile on his face. He says he should at least use his power. Suddenly, Jill is wide open. Jill looks at the guy strictly and asks him to go closer to business without waste of time. The protagonist presses his hand against his chest and confesses that his heart seems to jump out. Eunice is surprised to ask whether it is true. He reaches out the guy his hand, saying that he will gladly help him in this situation. The guy with a gesture shows that he now has only 20% of his strength, and therefore it is completely helpless. The protagonist raises his head up, and then falls on his knees and screams loudly, not understanding why all this happens. Jill continues to hold on his head, with his mouth wide open. Before her stands a sword that sees the space quite differently than everyone else. Lily looks at him and thinks that he is a very whimsical young man. She is a good old man, but he does not know how to navigate this situation. Eunice smiles, trying to understand what went wrong. At that moment, he feels a helpless magician. A complete set of losers. If it were a bingo game, everything would be great, but unfortunately not, so things are bad. But the adventure continues. The steps were drawn on the water. Eunice appeals to the boys and asks if they have not been out of this floor for almost 3 weeks. Jill sighs and replies that they have already tried their best, but nothing helped. All three are confidently moving forward, and under their feet waves diverge on the water. The main character gently knocks on the walls on the wall. He looks at the boys and says that this is the problem. Eunice lifts his gaze slightly above the guy and suddenly notices something that is very surprising. They are faced with a massive stone slab covered with bizarre patterns, like a part of the wall. Eunice asks himself with surprise that this is a giant door standing on their way. All three look closely at her. The protagonist confesses that even when he struck her sword, nothing happened. Eunice asks this again. Lily replies that the attempt did not work. The girl says that a magical circle is cut on the door surface. However, she cannot look at it properly because everything is tightened with black. Lily does not look away from the door. Meanwhile, the girl turns to Eunice and asks if he can help her. The guy smiles and says confidently that it will help her without any difficulty. Bright lights suddenly flash around him and the water under his feet is excited and begins to worry. Behind the guy from the water suddenly emerge silhouettes of unknown creatures. The main character watches this unusual sight. The guy looks at these figures that have already grown several times higher than the people themselves. The protagonist is wondering what it is. Eunice is thinking, and then replies that it is just a regular spell. The water got on the door. He explained that he used water to fill the recess on the surface. Then he moved the received imprint to the ground so that the form remains unchanged, as if someone had turned the page in the book. Lilia carefully examines the water casting of the print of the door that is spread right on the ground. The introduced is looking at the magical circle with interest, trying to understand what it is for. While he thinks he analyzes each element, Lily is quietly behind. Suddenly, Eunice is aware of something and opens her eyes wide. Jill looks at the guy in surprise. Eunice says he knew everything. He asks the guys if they really do not understand that they were quite accidental. The girl, meanwhile, puts her hand on a magical circle. The girl denies that. The young man looks carefully at her and says he does not believe in the accident. Lily looks carefully at all patterns on the circle. She confesses that she could not imagine that she would face something similar here. The apocryphal magical circle and the beast. Eunice says that this maze was specially built. Lily and Joe listen carefully to him. It turns out that someone involved in the labyrinth is related to the overthrown king. There are 2 books with painted covers. Rustic religion has sacred texts that do not belong to conventional canonical scriptures and are called apocrypha. In the dark from white lines, the eye slowly erupts. Everything that is recorded in the apocryphal has never been created to entertain the reader in fictional fairy tales. White rays diverge from the eye and further. The Apocrypha is detailed in detail the story of one of those who lived in the dead time of the fall of the king, about the grandiose disaster that sought to destroy the whole world, and also about his battle with the apostle of God, Rusty. The girl directs the staff on the white lines, and from it begins to flow the light. Junius clicks his fingers and, smiling, turns to Jill and Lily, inviting them to sum up what happened. The guy pointing to them sitting in front of a magical circle frankly confesses they both have a terrible sense of orientation. The protagonist turns to him and notes that the guy will not even dare to flee from here. Smiling, Junius assures the boys that they are not worried, because now he has become part of such a cheerful society. He tells that for 4 months they have been wandering through a maze, all this time moving not in the direction, or vice versa. They have been coming from here from the beginning. During this period, they even managed to defeat several bosses. Lilia says that she is finally clear. Jill looks at the young man, and he does not understand what is happening here. Junius explains, they are apocryphal animals. Silhouettes that are constantly approaching a person emerge on the circle. These are the beasts that the falling king used during the Battle of Rak. Some believe that these creatures were a part of the Most Falling, but this opinion can be left aside. The introduced stands in front of the door and says that it was once a person so strong that a whole army was needed to victory. It could compare by force with the whole country. Jill listens carefully to his words. The protagonist, with his face dissatisfaction, asks the boy about the country, saying what is quite possible. Meanwhile, Lily sits quietly behind. The girl stuck her finger in Jill and asked directly if she had exaggerated. The guy replied in confusion that he did not say at all, that it was all not true or something like that. On this, she slightly poked his finger in his cheek. The girl remembered the monster who won Guild and said that the horse he cut off was called a nightmare. Lilia asks the guy how he reacts if she says it was only a small animal. The guy looks at her. He is stunned that only a child is still in front of him. The girl asks if he finally realized it. The protagonist carefully removes Lily's hand from his shoulder and asks if these animals were here. Junius listens to their conversation carefully. The young man confesses that he thought that these creatures had long gone when the apostle destroyed them many years ago. Jill says that there is a proportion of truth in every rumor. For example, there are still some animals left in these places, or they say that this maze was built by a fallen king. Junius agrees. It is very similar to the truth. He carefully examines the drawings of the monster and tells the protagonist that at least there are some traces. Eunice carefully examines the circle and notes that this magical symbol, which is carved on the door, has already been mentioned in apocryphal texts. Lilia holds Jill with her hands and looks carefully at Junius. She asks him if he realizes that all this is pure magic. Lilia is not the first time he sees the same. He replies that he suspects Rusty used a magical circle, the mention of which were only in original writings in 7 copies of Apocrypha. After that, he is interested in Lily, whether she wants to become his apostle to grow up. The girl in response refuses, confessing that she has not liked this idea. Lilia looks to the door and points out that this magical circle is slightly different from the previous one. This is not a regular protective spell. It does not allow the foreigners to penetrate. But the main thing is that the same spell keeps what is hidden behind the gate without releasing outside. The protagonist cautiously leads a magic wand, thinking aloud. If it is really a spell that created Rusty, it is better to leave it intact. Huma denies that this is not quite true. Jill looks at him with curiosity without understanding anything. Then Huma explains that there should be a key that can be used to remove this spell. Lilia agrees that he thinks so. The main character, meanwhile, draws the key in his imagination. Eunice thoughtfully noted that the creature at the level of Rusty, even if it is difficult to say whether she was a person at all, was still able to create the perfect magical circle. Although this spell is incredibly complicated, it was created so that a person with sufficient skill in holy magic can still dispel it, so it must be destroyed. Jill looks at Eunice, and he thinks the meaning of everything that has happened, and finally says that this maze is somehow connected with the overthrown king. He stops in front of the circle and announces that he has now become a kind of checkpoint through which the Rast can pass. Also, anyone else who owns magic can do it. But it is important that this person does not accurately serve the king. Eunice is already preparing to explain what it means. Lillian and Jill look closely at the guy, waiting for him to explain something. The guy stands in front of them in silence, in no hurry to speak. He spreads his hands wide and confesses that he does not understand what it means. Hearing this, Jill is so confused that his face falls directly into the water. All of the water. Jill moves sideways and notes that he has already fallen asleep. Eunice gently hugs him and assures that it was only an innocent trick. Lily laughs with them. Eunice holds the main character with both hands without releasing him and pulling him. Lilia admits that Eunice is right in at least one. They really do not know what they do not know. Eunice turns and adds that they simply have no clues. The man returns to the main character and is wondering whether he is an adventurer, as well as what he knows. The protagonist turns back. Eunice is still holding on to him, and he is interested in whether he learned something about the maze before he went down. The protagonist replies that he knows nothing. But Eunice does not seem and continues to be questioned, whether he has been acquainted with at least the plan of the terrain or something like that. Jill turns to Eunice and asks her to stop, explaining that he has never been an adventure seeker. He was just hired to help. Jill heard that extremely strong monsters are found in this maze. At this point, Lily watching them closely. There were stone columns. Against this background, the protagonist appears. He looks like he is not allowed to give him an adventurous certificate. The protagonist suddenly breaks into a cry, sounds the name of Yomini, and then, covered with anger, simply falls on the ground and sits down. Jill, with anger on his face, states that Eunice is a real scoundrel. In response, Eunice laughs and explains that as soon as he enters the forbidden zone, he will receive a fine immediately after leaving. Lilia sighs and says that now she is even more sorry for her. The guy does not stand and starts crying. The introduction thinks and admits that, to be honest, it is really very strange. Lily agrees with her. Jill is asking them to stop finally because they have been talking about it for too long. The girl says that, in her opinion, he knew too much, that from the very beginning he intended to do it with Jill. Eunice thinks about her words. The girl looks carefully at the main character and asks whether he has any guesses why it happened. And the annoyed guy does not restrain himself and asks where he knows it. The protagonist remembers two people and then confesses that he does not remember anything that could make him lie. He said that it is even difficult for him to believe that Jill was just unhappy. The protagonist asks him why he decided so. Lily and Eunice look closely at the guy. Eunice expresses her opinion. She believes that we can still assume that Lily and her intentionally brought here. He says Gila that he is the most prominent sword of their era. Such a significant personality could not be here by accident. In response, the man asks not to exaggerate his merit. They say he is not so strong, because he never managed to defeat his teacher. Eunice confesses that he does not know exactly, but thinks, if the guy was able to defeat the legendary monster on his own, then he is probably one of the strongest. The guy feels embarrassed by such words. Eunice recalls that he did not even fight for all the troubles, because he simply had no points. Jill asks him to stop. He notes that if he continues, some hermit master will definitely come and will read him for considering himself one of the strongest. He points to two chunky men who accuse him of arrogance. And indeed, can one be called a person who is able to defeat the legendary beast? Eunice wondered if he really spent 4 months in the most difficult labyrinth, because now he became noticeably stronger than it was when it first appeared here. The guy was embarrassed, acknowledging that he really fought, and decided that everything was. But suddenly his look falls on his finger. He leans and knocks on the stone surface, confessing that his main enemy is pride. Lilia and Eunice nod, agreeing with him. Jill, holding a swollen finger, jokingly asks whether it is fashionable for him now. Eunice intervenes and advises Lilia to stop teasing Gil for at least for a while. At this point, Jill exclaims, amazed, how could they be so mocking his self-esteem so much? A man confesses that he is still worried about him, so he wants to make one offer. At this time, Lilia carefully processes Gila's finger, and he is interested in Eunice, as the man says. Eunice suggested that the boys go through this gate together. Jill and Lily looked carefully at him. Eunice stood with his arms outstretched right in front of the main character, who looked at her carefully when she explained her words. Jill thought. At first she came here with the intention of winning, and later the thought flashed in her head, to go back. However, everything was delayed deeper. If she immediately said she wanted to get out faster on the surface, it would seem a sign of weakness. The guy squeezes his fist and reports Eunice that he is still going to take up the case, because that's exactly what he was conceived from the beginning. Eunice smiles and is interested. What about Lily? It adds that if they are delayed longer, then everyone will start worrying. The protagonist reassures Lily, assuring that she should not worry. He himself predicted that they could stay a little. The girl looks at him with interest, as if asking where he is so sure. He recalls how he stood in front of a woman leaning a little. The man warned Arlen in advance that their adventure could take a long time, so she should not worry at least half a year. Lilia thanked him for these words. Lilician Gil looks at Eunice, who explains, once they have passed such a path, then quickly go down to the very bottom of the maze, and from there to look for a way out instead of returning to the surface. Jill thought, and realized that he was just a wonderful idea to teleport. Eunice smiles and says that that was meant. The guy points to the place on the floor where something shines. It is there, at the deepest level of the maze. The hidden heart is a real sea of mana. If the group has a magician, they can use this power to create a teleportation spell. Eunice put her hand on her chest and said that they had such a magician. Lilia raised her hand and added that in this case she was involved in this. He looks back and notes that this maze is very strange. The three saints asked him to explore him from the inside, but he has no such opportunity. The guy sighs. They say, who knows how much time and effort it will take to go down so deeply. He says that they will probably no longer have another opportunity to gather such a powerful team. Jill asks what he means. The protagonist smiles and asks if Eunice really wants them to understand everything. Lilia smiles and tells that they, with Jill, were able to get such a depth without much difficulty. Eunice, putting his hand to his heart, tells everyone that he is now with them. So, together, they will become an invincible team. He lifts his eyes and says that not only the saints have felt negative energy from this place, the Magical Federation also made many ominous prophecies. When he came here, he came across heretical animals and a magical circle. Eunice says that now he does not leave a premonition, as if something terrible will happen. The young man bows his head low in front of the boys and politely asks them for help. Lily looks at him with a gentle smile. The girl takes the boy's hands and thanks to him that he came to her help. She is looking forward to working with him together. The protagonist confesses that he is also very grateful to him, because if he did not appear then, they would still be aimlessly wandering the maze. Jill evaluates its size and thinks of whose intuition will now lead them. Eunice and Lily were already going to play stone, scissors, paper, but the main character interferes sharply and asks them to stop. Jill waved his hand and said he would not be able to play with them in this game. The girl wondered why. The guy replied that he would still see nothing from what they would show. Eunice tells the guy that in this case he can just touch our hands. The protagonist notes that in this way they can easily change their decision before he touches them. Lilia from Eunice is overwhelmed, and Jill adds that he suspected from the very beginning that they had thought something. The boys start denying, and one of them says it is dishonest. They ask if he does not trust his friends at all. At this point, Jill realizes that he does not want to take such responsibility. The protagonist realizes that if he will not make everyone there after such an inspiring speech, he will be made guilty of a failure. The guy exclaims that everyone stops and suggests that you decide where to go. He does not want to be responsible at all. The girl denies, reminding that recently the branch himself confessed. It was because of him that they got lost. His words come back to the boy, and he becomes painful. The protagonist throws his head back, and Eunice looks at him and asks for permission to speak frankly. Eunice states loudly that he can say with certainty. In this case, he is absolutely not capable. The main character quietly agrees, they say, and he himself is not better. The main character asks why they were accused of him. The girl replies that this is all because he led them all. The guy extends his hand forward and says that he has already come up with a decision. He suggests that everyone disperses in different directions and then return to the same place. The boys look at him silently without saying a single word. The protagonist, with the serious expression, said, "He who will return here will become a leader for everyone." Eunice and Lilia silently watched him, each immersed in his own thoughts. A little later, Eunice decided to share her considerations about what happened. Stone towers hang from under the ceiling. The entrances enthusiastically notice that it looks incredibly cool. Jill counts up to 3 and rushes rapidly. Eunice and Jill are already standing nearby. Eunice rejoices when he saw Lily, and Jill confesses that he could not think that he would meet her again. The exhausted girl leads her eyes up, holding her stick firmly. Eunice got the first. She spent only 4 hours on it. Jill came second in 5 hours, and Lilia got the finish line in the last, almost 9 hours. The girl fell to her knees. Tears rolled to her eyes, and she lifted her hands. Lilia did not hold back the admiration. Joy sounded in her voice. She screamed of her happiness and thanked for returning whole and unharmed. A tear rolls down the cheek. He says it is incredible that this is really the top of human achievements. Eunice applauds and thinks that there are really people in this world even more meaningless than him. Meanwhile, Jill rejoices that everyone was able to return, and he took second place. In the end, the other group members accuse the main character that he is too volatile and not attractive at all. The young man shouted in response that it was a clean lie. The next day, the characters on the huge doors suddenly shook. Everyone stood in front of this door, which until recently blocked the path. But now they have opened slightly, opening the ominous, unspecified depths of the maze that were waiting in front. The protagonist stands on a stone in the rain and lifts his eyes to the sky. He thinks about whether he is needed here. Lily and Eunice look closely at him. Now they look at him with interest, hoping to hear the answer. Together they hide among the stone blocks. Another month has passed and all this adventure unfolded surprisingly successfully. Initially, the boys behaved quite politely. Eunice turns to them with a smile, if he can just follow them for the first time to get along with everything. Jill with Lily support him and agree. Unison creates Gilda, saying that she saw the monster here. The main character assures that he will now understand everything. He exclaims something and encroaches with the sword with a scope. The main character cut the monster into pieces, after which Lily with a smile and admiration looked at the boy. However, Eunice quickly got used to everything new. The protagonist was already prepared to kill the monster with a sword, but suddenly it is a head of magic, who destroys the monster right in front of him. At the hands of Eunice, the waves of energy diverge. He stands in front of the boys, and Jill, holding his sword, waves to him and says that he seems to have become stronger. Lelia adds that this is a great job. The guy smiles when hearing such words in his address. In the air, charming patterns appear, and the conductor orders the rain to retreat and free the road. The boys look forward to the views up. Eunice stands, stretching his hand up, showing something. And so, the first drops begin to fall on the ground. Subsequently, the rain began at full force, frightening the apocryphal animals that could not stand the elements and died. Eunice is satisfied, lifting his eyes to the sky and the rain that he has caused. At this time, the main character Lily, with him, also falls under the rain. The branch releases the head and notes that thanks to magic Eunice recently, they do not have to meet monsters. Eunice is wondering if it is bad, and the guy in response confesses that for several days he did not even remove the sword from the vagina. The protagonist begins to cry, realizing that he has now become completely helpless. Lily stands in silence, and Eunice looks at the guy with interest, trying to understand what is happening to him. The girl says that if you think about it, then her protective barrier is no longer needed. Spooky creatures still do not get to them. In addition, he has made something like a barrier that envelops them from above. Lilia notes that since they both use the same spells, it can mean that they can be replaced by each other. Jill burst into tears and said that if you think, the name of his secret technique was really reminiscent of the moon, and she is very closely related to the stars. Eunice hugs himself with his hands and begins to cry, begging everyone to stop saying such sad things. Jill and Lily are shocked to look at the guy. After that, the guy still smiles. He shows his finger on others and apologizes, they say, just felt a little deprived. He is told that he is one who is easily losing his spirit. Everyone start moving forward. Eunice notes that he felt inevitable, so he was already looking forward to meeting these two. The guy looks and confesses that he spent the first time with someone who is almost his peer. He literally shines with happiness and confesses. Deep in his soul, he is so joyful that he barely restrains himself. The feeling is like how a fun excursion. Lily jokingly calls him a sweet guy and laughs too. Eunice gritted his fist in front of her and asked the guys if they had ever been hiking. Lily sighs and confesses that she was there, but it was very exhausting. The protagonist is amazed and asks if they are not on a picnic and then cheerfully answers. Lily and Eunice look in different directions. The girl tells that she visited a large library as a child. Eunice sighs and says that he has nothing to do. The protagonist looks at the boy and asks whether he studied at the institution where they accept at a very young age. Eunice denies and says he does not recall any of his peers who would get there. He remembers how insignificant they seemed among other people. Everything happened for him quite differently. He managed to enter the institution. Thanks to the acquaintances of his teacher, which was a rarity for someone of this age, he was in the heart of this institution. The girl joyfully asks if this is his first journey. She imagines how exciting it should be. Eunice smiles and replies that yes, it's really his first time. They stand with their hands raised. Eunice says he just wants to scream with joy now. Jill warns everyone to relax because it is the most difficult maze. He lifts his gaze up and recalls his words. Now their combat force is 3 times higher than the one that was then. However, he says that it is simply impossible to relax here, and sounds to the guys that he also wants to be with them. All 3 stand side by side and rejoice together. Eunice says that you do nothing here. These people are really the best in their business. It does not exaggerate when it says it is the strongest team of all possible. If they can still pass this maze, humanity will have to reach the highest level of their capabilities. Eunice would even point out that what is happening now is quite natural. It would be strange if they did not obstruct at all. Lily with a smile notes the boy that he was quite talkative. The guy honestly admits, all because he is a little self-righteous. Lily only smiles cunningly and says that it is so noticeable. The girl confesses that their extraordinary power has to pay a very weak sense of orientation in space. Eunice believes that he has everything right. Jill jokes that only she is constantly lost. The girl sighs and says she would not want to remain the only problem. The boys sat by the campfire, looking at the flickering of the fire. Eunice shared his curiosity. "Why did the S-rank team suddenly stop on the third floor?" he asked thoughtfully, biting a piece of fish. The fish turned out to be inedible, and the guy did not restrain. "What a hazel to taste." Lilia again asks him this question. Eunice explains that they were the best of the best, so in his opinion, they had to go even further. But the protagonist disagrees with that. Jill tastes fish, but having a little breath after escaping, tells her friends that the boss on the third floor was too strong. Unison Lilia looks carefully at the guy. She was asked if it was really so difficult. The guy agrees, biting a piece of fish. He chooses food and lifts his gaze to heaven, remembering how to really think about death. The guy recalls his battles with the monsters and notes that if they assume that they are an apocryptic beast before them, this is exactly one of the most powerful he has ever met. Eunice asks if Jill means that the monster was stronger than the nightmare. The guy confidently replies that it is. Eunice asks him to wait, because it is not what he heard earlier. The guy looks at him and then thinks. The protagonist tells that all this happened after his reincarnation. Initially, in the first phase, it was as dangerous as the nightmare, but everything that happened then was truly terrible. The guy stands on the wreckage of a stone, courageously opposing a monster that hangs in the air. The monster has a few hands and sharp claws that she tries to grab her opponent. Suddenly, the monster closes the jaw. The man in the glasses notices how tentacles begin to appear from his mouth. The monster does not look like. His new look scares even more. The main character understands at that moment. The creature changed directly in his eyes. In the heart of the monster suddenly a giant ball, similar to the eye. If Jill did not defeat the poisonous dragon before and did not raise his rank, he would definitely fail to survive. Lilia looks at the guy and now finally understands why he then passed. Jill notes that it has the feeling, if it were not for the experience, he would not have been alive for a long time. The campfire is still blazing, throwing the golden light on the face of friends. The guy thinks thoughtfully. He says that what happened to them was a real wonder. He asks for friends whether something like that happened to them. Those nod and answer that have already experienced similar adventures. The girl tells that there are many people who have never felt it. She remembers children who constantly asked her or her true stories. She remembers how she tried to explain everything. She honestly told them the truth, but they decided it was a fiction. Since it was difficult for her to explain it, she was asked, "What did you feel then?" The girl appeared so unexpectedly and threatening that the children immediately felt anxiety. She confessed to them that everything she said before was actually a fiction. They had to open the truth. It was just a fiction. Hearing this, the boy did not restrain himself and called her a liar. Eunice is thinking with a serious look and says that even when she was not believed, she still told the truth. The girl brought the boy from thought when she turned to him. Eunice apologized, explaining that he just thought. He says that he does not have proven evidence at this time, probably thinks too much about it and asks not to pay attention to it. Lily tried on his mustache and says with a smile that that is why he would probably say the hero a man from a detective novel, anticipating his own death. Jill agrees with her joke and they laugh together. The girl notices the next door in front and reports it, which is why the guy is scared and asks if his turn is now. Eunice, laughing, says he was lucky to be the first. They argue who belonged to this door and they laugh together. New black doors suddenly appear in front of the boys. This is the last passage that leads to the deepest level of the most intricate maze. To open this door, they will have to spend as many as 10 days. The group continued its way with a sublime mood, and in 2 days 2 of them would disappear from life forever. A pillar of smoke rises into the sky. A young girl in gloves sits next to him, hugging his knees. The girl sits in the midst of the burned residues where her home once stood. Behind her, a man approaches her and says sympathetically that it is a pity that her house has burned. The man extends her a package and says it is for her. The girl raises her hands to accept the gift and thanks her husband. He approached her and asked if she was injured. The girl replied that everything was fine with her. She was doing paperwork at the headquarters last night. Smoke comes from the man. He asks the girl whether the knights were investigating, but he shakes his head and replies that the Holy Knight has only promised to oversee her. A scar with a scram is tightened with a cigarette and asks if it is somehow related. The girl asks in surprise what he is talking about. The man tells her that he disappeared yesterday. The girl looks at him with surprise and cannot believe heard, so she asks again. He shakes the ashes from the cigarette and tells them that everyone was looking for it, but they did not find anything. Then he calmly returns a cigarette to his mouth. The man says Kuraha to leave the city. She looks at him in surprise without understanding the reasons. Then he explains that a very powerful magician, Archimag of Stars himself, came to the maze. Initially, in their group, there was only a rank A, but because of the gooing, he was forced to raise to this level, although he believed that such raids could not be able to do. The situation is complicated even more, and now the man begins to understand. This story is not as simple as it seemed at first. The girl looks and asks whether this story is so confusing. The man nods and replies. Smoke clubs are raised of all buildings. The girl asks what happened to the rest of the group, because they can't leave from here. The man continues to smoke, wonderfully wondering what it all means. He raises his hand to the face as if trying to find answers in himself. He says that he just took that magic sword. Everyone around his side and now obey him. The man lowers his eyes and says that everyone has something that is ready to fight. Then he appeals to the girl asking, please do not become the way they are. It is too early to sink in their own passionate desires. At that moment, a stranger approaches them and turns to a man named Cholon. The girl in the glasses says that if he really feels, he has to tell her everything. Holland is surprised by her words. They appear in the raincoat. Clea looks at her silently, and Holland smiles, holding a cigarette. Two guys are running somewhere, and if they look back, their company has changed over the years. Those who have been with them were no longer the ones that are now. The boys run rapidly from the giant monster who chases after them. A young man with dark hair rotates, looking back. Suddenly, two guys, along with the monster himself, broke out of the cliff. One of them shouts to someone, demanding that he does something. The magician begins to spell, draws in the air of a circle, and the second immediately does something with his staff. Around the monster are formed shining strips of magic, and he suddenly fades in the air, unable to move. They may not have been the strongest, but thanks to its short plan and working together, they managed to take the mountain. The guy with the bow, flying upside down, pulls the bowstring, and as soon as he releases, the arrow breaks from the bow and rushes directly into the monster. The owner of the wing continues to fly down, crying out loud, without bringing his eyes off this terrifying monster. Suddenly, someone's hand covers the sword's hand. The arrow flies directly to the chin of a terrible beast with large fangs, but reflects from it. Someone around loudly shouts, "Okay, Ox, caught!" The magicians rotate and order Godok to fight. Therefore, one of the men picks up a Godok with his shield and forcefully throws him forward. He removes the sword from behind his back, proclaiming that he understood everything. After that, one decisive movement cuts the monster in half. The whole team rejoices in victory over the monster, all thanks to coordinated cooperation. Goglin gladly notes that it was the best team that could only be imagined. Haglin, with a smile, shakes his hand. The man tells that he was once a completely different person. Horland sits at the table with two girls. There's a mug in front of him. He remembers how many years he was a good leader, talking about his achievements. The girls listen carefully to his story. The man takes a mug and shares the idea. When their team had only the rank AB, it was the best period for everyone. The rest of the current team joined almost at the same time. In other warehouses, they did not manage to reveal all their abilities, so their group became a real restart for them, as if a rehabilitation center. Dutch remembers the smiling partner of the feed, with his arms behind his shoulders. He says that the feed was special. Clea asked Goland why he then betrayed one of his comrades, literally inserting a knife in his back. She remembers it well. The man agrees that this is a really interesting question. He recalls the Gudok's sword, who once lifted from the water. He is convinced that it all started at the moment he touched that magic sword. He recalls what happened after that. He carefully inspects his magical sword, holding it in both hands. The teammate called Gox, they say, it's time to go. Kodland only looked at him and tightened with a cigarette. He looks at Godok with interest, and he carefully views a circle on his sword. Dutch reports that everything has changed. It has become completely different. Girls look closely at him. After that, Kuraha addresses the Holland asking where they found this sword. The man remembered the sword protruding from the water. They came across an average level of A-class dungeon, which looked like a huge water surface. This place was called the face of the ocean. The girl in the glasses also remembered that she read about something like in the reports. She wondered at the man whether there was a place with very salt water here. And Hulang nodded in affirmative. Coffee is steaming. The girl confesses that she does not understand anything, but she is interested, whether you can find magic swords in such places. Holland replies that it is usually not so. If someone is looking for such a sword, then he goes searching for ancient ruins. Holland remembered how he once pointed his finger on the round sign on the sword, noticing the cracks that went on it. The group stands in front of the sword. Gonlin thought that the sword had left one of the dead. The girl asks about him again. He remembers how they fought with a giant snake. In the dungeons of rank B, such as it is, if the whole group is killed or receded, then there are different things and supplies in place. He recalls that brilliant diamond, but immediately notes that the magic sword is extremely valuable for any team, so there was no chance that he could be forgotten during the retreat. Kira Akal looks at him in surprise and says that his master has died. Holland only nods in agreement. He held this sword in his hands. Once he lifted him, an irresistible shortage of combat force, which restrained them, disappeared as if by a wave of hands, and they received rank S. He stands in front of the bodies of monsters who killed on his own. His teammates stop behind and are surprised to look at this picture. The man stands with his back to the feed. Hanlund claims that something is wrong with the feeder. The man is slowly tightened by a cigarette without drawing a look from Godak. He goes on, without even rotating, and Holland only looked at him without believing his eyes. Dutch recalls how they often imitated each other with him, standing next to a woman. Despite the fact that they were familiar for many years, he still had those who had to be protected. One man imagined himself as if he was standing next to himself, only as a child, and in his first year of life. He applied for withdrawal from the band before something irreparable happened. He again remembers the circle on the sword and the moment he went to the room. Children rejoice in loud, shouting that Dad returned. They welcome him at home. Golan sees his whole family in front of him. They sit at a table covered with dishes, and a stranger is located next to them. Behind his back stands the sword of Golan. She smiles with evil intention and tells her husband that he has a wonderful family. Children have fun with sticks, and the mother in the apron stands nearby, smiles and rejoices, watching them. The man removes the sword from his shoulder and turns to Galen with a smile, saying that he is glad to continue working together. In response, Hayland also expresses his pleasure, holding a mug in his hand and slowly releasing smoke. Golden thinks thoughtfully. Each of us has those we love. The girl remembers how she sat on the ground in the crowd and felt completely lonely. She asks, "That's why no one tried to help when he attacked Jill." Holland thinks and then agrees. Yes, he also thinks. The girl in glasses notes that it is not surprising why no one has previously expressed it. Kuraka raises his hand and asks, although they wanted to tell them all the truth about his family. The man drinks a sip from the mug, looks at the girl and, closing her eyes, thinks about her question. He said that the Holy Knights have been watching their home for several days. If it appears, they are unlikely to remain indifferent and just look. He asks if he understands it correctly. The girl in the glasses smiles and notes that he has a sharp eye, and reinforcements came a few days ago. Kavlan sings, holding the mug in his hand and swirling one eye. Then he seems to ask something. Therefore, suddenly puts a mug on a table with a dead knock. He looks carefully at the girl who stands in front of him and asks how all these events are related to them. They look at each other with serious faces. Choland asks why the church decided to join this game. The girl thought and reported that the older knights of the Order of the Saints were suspected. In all this story, a fallen king is involved. Chorus looks stunned at a girl who seems to be not at all concerned about what has happened, and Choland also watches her with horror. Something falls on a friend. The man is surprised and asks what she's talking about. He reaches out his hand and says it is only a fictional fairy tale. He is strained and asks how the apocryphal writings of the millennial ego can be associated with what is happening now. Kuraka is surprised to ask if this king is really alive. The girl understands their confusion. Kudlin confesses that even now he does not have a clear answer to how the king is associated with everything that is happening lately. The girl in the glasses noted that this is the proposal that 3 saints made. She showed a gesture on 3 girls sitting nearby. It embodies a certain symbol and tells that they, as in the magical empire, had similar predictions. Eunice stands side by side and tells me that one of those Sarah, the famous Archimag Gorland, is now sitting with your hands off. The man raises his head and closes his face with his hand. He asks them if they really hint that he is also somehow related to the king of the king. The girl tells him that they are currently adhering to this version. Kuroka looks at her with surprise. She looked at the trembling cup. It is just an assumption. But if you decompose all the events in order, the girl suggests that the magic sword she found once belonged to the fallen king. But suddenly Kurak is leaning to the table, holding it firmly. It is raised from the table, which causes everyone around surprise. Everyone looks at it with distrust. Meanwhile, the chickens again notice. The mug on the table trembles. The girl asks if they feel it too. Everyone agrees and interested in what a strange noise. And suddenly, white smoke appears in the middle of the city. All together got up from the table and hurried to the street to find out what was happening. They looked up and looked together. Goratlin fades with surprise, looking carefully at a strange thing in front of him and trying to understand what it is. At first, his look is not only noticed by a bird's wing protruding above. The huge bird opens its toothpaste. It flies in the sky, decisively pulling a clawed paw forward. Everyone around you understand is not just a creature, but an apocritical beast. The protagonist cuts the monster with a sword in half and reaches it, but at the same time it cannot be surprised how dangerous this opponent was. Eunice looked at the Gila, clapped her hands and said that he was now good. Jill just smiled back. The protagonist puts the sword on his shoulder, smiles, and looks at Umani, saying that he now understands him. A few more monsters fly directly on the Gil. He firmly squeezes his sword. Since they passed through the second gate, but the feeling remained quite obvious. Jill has a sharp motion destroys one monster, and there is another one behind. He looks carefully at her. Jill cut his head, killing him. The protagonist realizes that the monster has become too powerful. Their level has changed strikingly. Eunice's high levels no longer give them any advantage, although he is not in a hurry to draw final conclusions. Still, each of them can easily compete even with that giant horse. Compared to the enemies they met, these opponents look incredibly strong. It continues to ruthlessly destroy monsters. If at least one of these creatures was able to escape from the gravitational nucleus of the maze and be outside, it would easily be destroyed by the whole settlement. Jill carefully examines the size of the maze and then looks away. After that, she lifts her eyes and asks the boys if they also think that this maze is really very confusing. They move on and understand that on about the 170th floor. Now they are beginning to be interested in how many floors exist in this building. They stop. The protagonist reflects. Apparently, there are some 200 floors. Eunice says that, in his opinion, there are only 216 floors. Everyone is surprised. Where does he have such an accurate figure? Eunice explains. It's 6 in Cuba. Lilia lifts his head and says that they seem to be almost ended. The boys look at her silently. The girl is embarrassed and confesses that it is just an anticipation. The protagonist smiles and jokes that the holidays hint at the prophecy. Eunice laughs and agrees that this is a really right remark. Jill and Eunice Monschi flee from an angry Lily. Jill turns to Archimag, asking what he thought at all. Eunice apologizes to everyone, explaining that when he is too far from the stars, his sense begins to bring up. Eunice says he feels much better when he is at home, and suddenly the girl beats the Gila on the cheek so much that he falls to the ground. He is lying and thinks about whether this is really the way to look like a real adventure seeker. Lilia only quietly points out that the life of the adventurer is always full of difficulties. Eunice shares his impressions. This is not exactly the place where he would like to stay for a long time. If it weren't for reliable friends, Jill and Lilia, it is unlikely that the hero would have coped with all this alone. He lifts his head. Jill realizes that if he was left with that group, then it would hardly be so far away. He sighs upset and persuades himself that it is not about the bad abilities of these adventurers. However, looking at their battle skills, it is difficult to disagree. They will not really have the strength to cope with at least a few monsters of this level. It was only because there were 3 of them that they managed to move so far in this confusing maze. Jill says, after all, everything makes sense. Lily looks at the boy with surprise, hearing his words. Jill apologizes, explaining that she just said it out loud without thinking. Lily looks at the main character and notes that he talks with himself too much. The young man thought and was about to deny the girl, but suddenly she leaned to him and quietly said that everything was the way he thought. Lilia reminded him of different phrases, for example, "Yeah, that's what," and many other similar statements. She is wondering if he had already forgotten. The guy replies what is quite possible. The incentive smiles. Eunice Hobby notes that he is a little envied, and regrets that he could not join the adventure earlier, but it is childish naivety. The girl smiles and says it is even cute. The young man confesses that he always dreamed of finding friends of his age. Lilia looks at her friends with a warm smile and offers them, even when they get out of here, write letters to each other so as not to lose their connection. The girl looks at the main character and says it also applies to him. He looks at her in surprise. She just smiles mysteriously and he can't stay out not to ask, does she speak sincerely? She poked her finger and stated that their sweet company had got a soulless guy. The guy immediately denied, they say. It is not true, because as soon as they came from here, he will go on a journey again, so letters are unlikely to find him. The girl imagines how the letter travels between the islands. She says that the guy could just tell her where he was going, and then she would immediately send a letter to the local compartment. Jill is wondering if it is possible to do so. The girl is uncertain, but affirmatively replies. The lily with a smile pops his finger into the very face of the main character and cheerfully states, her handwriting is so sweet that he just gets to be surprised. The girl removes her finger and the guy gently rubs this place. Eunice, with happy tears in his eyes, asks Gil if he can do the same. He points to him with his finger and warns, I will send you 7 letters a week, each with a cipher. That's how you will get in the unraveling for a long time. Jill is amazed and asks why he always complicates everything. Eunice and Lilia stood in front of the main character, waiting carefully for his answer. The guy was confused and began to think about what to say. Jill says he has nothing mind. Hearing this, Lily and Eunice begin to smile. The boys froze in front of the giant doors on which the eye stood. They looked at him with interest and a little wary, but in general, everything seemed not so scary. They move forward and think, if you trust the words of the lily, then soon the maze will remain behind. The path turned out to be long and exhausting. The girl confesses that he almost does not feel her feet from fatigue. The boys raise their hands. Jill warns them so that they do not relax too hard. Eunice and Lily support his opinion. One of the guys puts his hand on the wall and asks if everyone is ready. Eunice smiles, and Lily, confidently putting his cams forward, reports that they are always ready. The guy looks at them with a smile. The protagonist recalls how he once fell into the abyss and begins to compare the current situation with what it started. Now the protagonist realizes that the adventure is not so scary. He puts the other hand on the door. Jill presses on the door and orders Sisama to open. Friends are watching the back. The door is heard a mysterious click. The protagonist looks forward and notices the bright balls, and the next moment feels unbearable pain. Something causes him a terrible blow, as if he cuts in half. From this he falls down, losing half, ranging. The protagonist notices an unfamiliar flash of light in the open door in the dark. The young man pushes Eunice with her hand, and she looks at him with unspeakable surprise. Eunice falls to the ground, and Jill rushes to grasp the sword. That time is missing, and the enemy has time to give him his hand. While the young man is still falling after the push, the main character, who has already been deprived of half of the trunk, also begins to fly rapidly. Eunice notices a dark figure in the darkness that arises next to the main character. It turns out that it was a bird, illuminated. The bird opened its beak, and suddenly a magical ball arose from it. She rushed straight at Eunice, and the guy stood away from a surprise in full shock. The monster releases a penetrating ray from the beak. He aims at Junin, but Lilia has time to save the guy. Lily, with a tense face, continues to hold his hands firmly, holding back the attack of the bird, and fragments of stones fly around it. Suddenly, it is illuminated by a bright flash of light, and she unwittingly throws her head back. Eunice is watching this with horror. The protagonist turns his gaze to the stars, lying on the floor with a wound passing through his mouth. He raises the baked hand, turns to the stars in the east, and orders them to lean before him. The ray of light goes to the guy, and he is not able to restrain him. The head of the protagonist falls down as long as Eunice continues to hold the flash of light persistently. A small charming ball clicks, and suddenly circles and strange signs appear on the floor, weaved in a giant clock. Eunice could not restrain the flash of light from the monster. At the same moment, the clock arrow begins to tremble. The clock's arrow suddenly moves back, turning time back for a moment. Yes, time seems to be mowed for 1 second. The head of the main character lay on the floor. He tried to lift his gaze, but the eyelids were heavily, and his eyes were slowly stepping. In his body, as in this fading consciousness, there was only one thought. The guy slowly opens his eyes. Jill looks at the white shadow next to him and understands. This is his soul. The main character looks at her with surprise. He looks up with his soul up to a bright flash. Just in front of them, a dazzling glow that is about to explode. The main character just reached out. Jill opened her eyes wide, watching the flash of light. His soul quietly appears before the flash, as if the branch is trying to grasp her hand. In the position that he has repeatedly imagined in his imagination, his soul begins to move forward, extends his hand, leaving visible traces. The young man raises his sword, and his soul merges with a blade. All this happens exactly as he imagined thousands of times earlier. The guy continues to reach his goal. The soul of the protagonist extends his hand to the sword, and finally the fingers touch the arms. It was by this hand that he has not taken a sword in his fingers more than once and not two, which had long been covered with cracks. The soul squeezes the hands of cold weapons. The protagonist grabs the sword and decides to go forward. At that moment, he uses his deadly technique. The young man is strongly rushed forward and, without stopping, begins to pull the sword out of the vagina. Thin lightning runs immediately on the blade. The protagonist looks closely at that bird, and then says that it is a special secret technique of the sword. He squeezes his sword more firmly, preparing for action. The man is almost imperceptibly waving his sword, leaving a thin mark in the air. The blade splits the bird in half. After that, the guy again raises the sword, getting ready to attack the bird. He cuts him again, and the main character watches all without emotions, holding a sword directed forward. This technique is called moon sleep. The bird, divided in half, falls on the floor next to the main character, who is on his knees. Jill lowered his hand to the floor, leaned and began to suffocate. His cheeks were wet from tears. A young man with a frightened look grabs his hand behind the face on which tears shine. He cannot understand what happened. Everything he could remember is how the boss had just crossed the threshold, immediately attacked him by a single one blow. The young man remembers the light that cut the darkness. He looks at his hand and thinks about what happened to him. The hero sharply brings out the cry of Lily. She asks Eunice not to move. The young man looks around and frozen at surprise. Jill is stunning to watch the wounded Eunice lies on the floor and suddenly laughs. He assures that everything is already in power. The girl does not hesitate to give him first aid. Suddenly the guy hits the pain and moan after his words. The girl strictly reminds him that she asked him to remain silent. The protagonist looks at Eunice and Lily, not believing his own eyes. Finally, Eunice sighs lightly. Now he smiles with relief and shines, confessing that he was already convinced. He is an end. All three sat on the floor. Eunice said quietly that he really died. Everything happened exactly as Jill said. Pride is your true enemy. The disappointed main character sits in front of Eunice, hugging his knees. Eunice looks at him calmly and says that he will now make every effort to live with obedience. We're scared? Jill returns to the boys and is wondering what happened then. Jill looks stunning at a guy who has told him that he had turned back. At least 1 second. Lily understood his words and looked at him carefully, asking if it was the new magic he had told of earlier. Eunice smiled in response and confirmed that everything was right. It was because of this magic that he was recognized as an archmage. With his skilled fingers, Eunice creates ribbons and balls in the air, explaining to him that it is a new technique that he opened on the outskirts of the stars. He confesses that he usually has to monitor the location of the stars much more closely and prepare for a long time, spending a lot of effort. In his thoughts, he returns before everything happened this time. Eunice smiles and says that this time he managed to do everything thanks to his own strength. He tells that his abilities are allowed to return time only for a short period, so he really rejoices that Jill has managed to defeat the boss at the only moment he created for him. Jill listens to him carefully without missing a word. Smiling, the guy thanks that all their efforts were not in vain. Then he turns to the Lily. He tells her that if it were not for her protection, he would not have been able to fully activate the spell. The girl only smiles in response. He put his hand on his chest and explained that those organs that had to be destroyed as a price would not return back. The main character rubbed his finger under his nose and laughed, and then he asked Eunice to climb. Jill looks at the boy with interest and asks what happened to his organs. Eunice also looks at him with a question, but he quickly guesses and reminds everyone that they still wander in the maze. He carefully inspects the walls of the maze and says that he had to use this spell in a place where no star mana is felt. Eunice remembers how she activated the spell and explains that that is why the only thing he could use was his own vital force. Eunice raises his head and asks the boys if they are astonished with this result, and then laughs loudly. At that moment, the guy confesses that his insight suddenly flashed like a balloon. The protagonist feels a true horror hearing it. He says that Lilia feels great, and people should call it a great saint. The girl smiles and jokingly agrees. They say, this is a really good idea. After all, they already have a great hero in Archimag, but she is still without a steep nickname. However, she will still think about it. Lily lifts her eyes and says that it is too early to call it, especially after everything that has happened. And at that moment, someone starts laughing. Jill was so frightened because of her size that she almost lost her head with fear. She sincerely believes that it could happen if it was not for Eunice, who came to her help in time. Lily, with a painful expression on the face, confesses that he is completely exhausted. It does not even have any desire to move. Eunice smiles, raises his head up and recognizes that it is becoming more difficult. He looks in the ceiling silently, and silence falls in the room. The main character sincerely thanks both to his friends. Together they stay on the floor, enjoying the moment of silence and supporting each other. Jill and Eunice look at the guy, and he turns away and murmur, "There is nothing to do." The branch met with a young man. Meanwhile, the young man asked the guy if he could continue to win the bosses on the floors, as he did so before. The branch did not hide the wonder of the words of Eunice. Inside, the guy only shook his head in silence. "Sorry." The branches tilted his head. The young man confessed that, if you were frank, he does not know how to do in a similar situation. Jill flicked gloomfully and said that he had just coped with one of the bosses who had an awakening effect. Eunice smiled and said he understands what was talking about. Then the branches wondered if they ever had a similar experience. Lilia smiled and admired with delight that she was feeling stronger than ever. She said that her forces had grown markedly. The branch thought that it was at this moment that he would not prevent him from rewinding. All this was because of a strange feeling that appeared immediately after returning to life. The young man's eyes expanded with surprise. Only now did he realize that he was doing it for the third time. This phenomenon is called knowledge. Although it looks in their own way, everyone has heard something about it. Junis exclaimed that he had happened to him 3 times. Lilia laughed and added that she was also part of their trinity. The branch believed that it was at such moments, when the situation hangs on the hair, when a person is checked for strength or when he opens something incredible, and happens most importantly, and when a person touches the great truth in such situations, he receives new knowledge. At such moments of her abilities, they grow incredibly quickly, and for a moment he enters a state of awakening, a special condition when a person is capable of what seems impossible. Due to this phenomenon, Jill has caused a decisive blow that changed the course of the battle. In addition, everyone was raised. This is what gave them the opportunity to grow so quickly and significantly, rising to a completely different level. Of course, if they did not stop and continue to develop at the same pace, they would have a chance to achieve the same power. However, over time, the path they go becomes getting shorter. The experience that someone has already gained along the way has a great influence on the true opportunities of warriors and magicians. Eunice proposed to go back in such a situation. He met with a look with a gill. He explained that when a person acquires knowledge, his or her abilities grow significantly. He wondered if the effect of awakening would disappear. Eunice replied that most likely it would happen. Lilia has also confirmed that she shares this opinion. Gur thought that he may now finally reach the same level of force as his mentor owned when they fought together with a poisonous dragon. The young man asked his comrades if they were sure that they could survive if they meet with the boss of this floor without activating any ability. The branches with all seriously stated that he would not be able to do so. In his memory, a moment of light was split into 2 parts. The young man believed that it happened because of his own negligence. After all, even when he collected all his attention, he was easily disabled, like a fly. The world is huge, but Gila is still lacking in experience, and he is well aware of it. The man expressed the opinion that while the man is alive, there is always hope. He noted that returning to the surface can take a long time. Lifting his head, the branch confidently stated that, nevertheless, to return, it is always better than not returning at all. Eunice bowed his head and said that this proposal seemed rather intelligent to him, and he would like to accept it. He returned to Lily and asked if she knew something. She looked at him in surprise and looked with surprise. Eunice wondered the girl whether the boss was killed by Jill, a fabulous creature, and how powerful he was. Lilia replied that it was a regular apocrine beast. The branch looked stunned at her, not believing his own ears. He had just been heard from Lilia. The girl added that, among other things, he also had mediocre combat skills. Gil lifted his eyes up and froze heard from heard. He could not believe the words of Lily. The horror gripped the young man when he began to imagine what it could lead to. Subsequently, the girl began to tell who the orcs were. It turned out to be a special kind of creatures. Lily asked if they were charming birds. She smiled and replied that it was enough to call them birds. The girl added that in any case they were weaker than the form of instances. Lily was convinced that these creatures also belonged to birds, and such creatures as a rule always attack a flock. One of the main problems in the battle with such an opponent is the members of a pack of lower rank. They are extremely viable and it is extremely difficult to overcome them. In fact, each such bird stands even stronger apocryphal beasts. Lilia added that everything happened in the same way as Rusty. She took the staff into her hands and hit him on the ground. The girl said that if you win the commander, the victory would be much easier. Eunice thought and asked if she would really be easier in this situation. At that time, the branches were just surprised, because he never understood what Lilia wanted to convey. She smiled and asked if the Rast was so frank. The girl in response confessed that she would like to know it. Gil looked at them in surprise and did not understand what the bird was talking about. He exclaimed to stop them immediately. The young man said that there were none of them in the boss room. Lilia looked closely at him. Gil smiled and suggested that he may be a creature from another species. The girl firmly stated that she was absolutely confident in her words. She asked if he knew that all the apocryphal creatures have a certain number on the body. It is possible to determine what kind they belong to. And this is no doubt Orcus. The branch was noticeably nervous, and sweat flowed down his face. He mentally compared the apocryphal beast with others and understood, by force, this opponent is a little inferior to the previous one. The branch asked if it was true and then laughed immediately. The man only thought that he had nothing left, as just to accept everything as he is. Lilia came closer and asked how he was doing. She wondered with interest whether Jill was not feeling depressed now. The young man replied a little uncertainly that he was not sad. He thought that the apocryphal beast dealt with him so easily because he was only the strongest among the weak. Although the branches were constantly trying to learn humility, it did not help. The young man lowered his head and said with sadness that he did not feel depressed. He just realized. He clearly overestimated his capabilities. Gilles succumbed to his own pride, and now he had to put up with it. Lilia tried to reassure him, asking not to worry. The guy quickly assured her that everything was fine with him. Eunice exclaimed with a sincere admiration that he was incredibly cool. There are people who never admit defeat and become stronger with every failure. But Gilles was not one of them. He realized that it was time to reject his unreasonable pride. This moment was to be a new beginning for him. The branch decided that he just needed to put up with this fact and draw appropriate conclusions. He thought about it and told himself that even having gained new knowledge, they still could not handle the huge apocryphal monster. Lilia and Eunice listened carefully to silently. Jill. Eunice came closer to the boy and clapped him on her shoulder. She cheered him up, saying not to be upset. The branch in response assured that everything was fine with him. Eunice replied that in this case, this is another reason why they all need to return. If they face again with that big apocryphal monster, they will end up for them. Knowledge is not a panacea, even if you try to correct it for the second time or even for the third time. Eunice nodded in response, agreeing, though he added that there was one detail. But Lily immediately asked if he knew something. The guy thought for a moment and finally replied that he knew. Eunice turned to the Gil and asked direction. Did he say that he removed the boss from the 3rd floor? The branch looked at him with surprise and confirmed that it was true. Eunice added that he not only died, he was killed by the branch himself. The young man once again confidently confirmed these words. The branch added that it was through his magic ball that the hall collapsed. And even when they all fell into the abyss, he managed to overcome the boss. Unison exploded the exclamation point, saying that he fell with Jill from the 3rd floor. And despite this, he not only survived, but did not die, just leaving his apartment. Eunice asked if he really fought with him in such a situation. The branch replied that this is true. They left the room. That guy was silent and stopped suddenly. He covered his mouth with his hand and stopped. Eunice asked if the boss had a number. Jin hesitantly replied that yes, he had a room. The branch wrote the number of LXVIIL and turned, looking closely at the Eunice. Eunice cast her gaze on Lily and immediately replied that she understood everything. She said that he belongs to the weakest monsters, but yet the power in it was a lot. Lilia added that he was even stronger than a nightmare. Eunice tilted his head and said that it turned out the monster, whom Jill won, was not a real boss of the 3rd floor. Jill was covered with excitement and could not believe his ears, hearing the words of Eunice. The further you go to the maze, the stronger the bosses are waiting for you on each floor. This rule always applies, without exception. However, it all depends on the unique abilities of each boss, because they determine how difficult it will be to win. This means that with each subsequent floor in the body of enemies is becoming more and more energy. Eunice explained that to put it simply, it is very strange that Gil met such a strong opponent on the 3rd floor. And it was only the tip of the iceberg. The branch sat and listened carefully to him, feeling a true mess in his thoughts. The bosses of floors cannot leave their rooms. The introduced did not fully understand how this mechanism works, but this is the mystery of the maze. He also noted that even the usual apocryphal monsters are subordinated to this rule. The guy added that until the branches opened the door, Orcus would not think of attack. It was very surprised. But even an apocryphal beast that was weaker than him was able to get out of his room. Moreover, he was able to transform and show everyone his true essence. Eunice realized that the most obvious conclusion is that the head of the 3rd floor is an apocryphal beast that was released from the power of the maze. The branch noticed a surprise on Unison's face. Meanwhile, the guy continued and noted that this situation could be looked at a different angle. Then the branches asked what exactly. Eunice suggested that the shackles of the maze may already weaken. The branch wondered if it was true, because in this case they would not be able to keep so many mana outside the maze. On this, Eunice only shrugged and confessed that he knew nothing. He said that long before their birth, there was an era of legends when the air around simply rushed from magical energy, and then the monsters could again rest on the surface. They have always been the natural enemies of people. Gil shouted in surprise and asked if it was too long ago. He was sincerely wondered if Eunice really believed that something like this could have happened in their lives. He said that in the worst case, it was really so, and the branch, having heard these words, froze in place, widely opened her eyes with surprise. But the introduced did not stop and continued to speak further. He said that now they are not just a beast, but a true legendary creature, an ancient animal that seemed to come out of the pages of ancient history. Eunice was going to speak further, but the branch interrupted him, noting that the Apocrypha age could be repeated again. He lowered his head and grabbed his head. The young man wondered if one could really be sure that this would not happen. The branch could not believe it. It seemed to him that it did not fit in his head. He gave way, and suddenly it's just prejudice? The friend, meanwhile, asked if it could be so that the third floor is actually some kind of special. The branch looked at Lily and wondered what she was thinking about it. The girl thought, frowned her eyebrows, and plunged into reflections. Lilia said that several pages had disappeared from the apocryph. The branch was surprised by such news, and immediately began to ask her about it. The girl said that 700 years ago there was a fire in the large library, and some of the ancient sacred scriptures burned down completely. But it affected not only it. The first 7 copies remained the same, unchanged. But from the second manuscript, everything became so unclear that it is still difficult to say that it was actually written. But when Lilia was reading these stories as a child, she often came to mind those details that were not enough. For example, did the king be killed, or how did Rusty fight with them? Now the girl finally learned the whole truth. She confessed that Rusty could not kill the fallen king. He only managed to lock him in this place. The branch looked stunned at the girl, not believing his ears, and Eunice only smiled mysteriously and said that she also thought the same. He said that this place was clearly created by someone. At the heart of its construction is a structure designed by Rusty, and immediately hidden the energy of the fallen king. In this pseudo-labyrinth, Eunice added that perhaps the description of this place was on the pages that burned during the fire. Lilia suggested that it is possible that someone specifically burned them. Eunice remained silent without saying a word, and the branch said that all this testifies only one thing. The chains begin to weaken. He wondered if the monsters were trying to break out in this situation. Lilia replied that no. She suggested that everything could be much more serious here. The girl exclaimed with horror that the labyrinth seal was about to collapse. Hill looked at her in surprise without realizing what was happening. Meanwhile, cracks began to appear on the seal. The branch asked if the seal would break, looking at Lily. The young man wondered what would happen if the printer failed. Eunice thought about it, and he said that of course he would not stop there. After all, the maze is still closed by apocryphal beasts. Not only ordinary but also powerful creatures that they have not yet met. They will be released on the surface at the same time. Eunice added that if this happens, then nothing to fix. Everything will be over. Lilia said it was not all. If a fallen king wakes up, the whole world will be crowded with mana. The girl added that then the civilization they know would be destroyed. That's what happened for a long time with their predecessors. Jill listened to her without hiding the horror in her eyes. The branch was finally lost. Lifting his eyes up, he exclaimed, "If so, this is another good reason to turn back." The guy said that such important information simply cannot be hidden from the whole world. The branch added that they definitely need to find a way to get out of this maze and tell everyone what they learned. The young man realized that it was impossible to deny their power. But this does not guarantee that someone will be the best because of it. Gore emphasized that we need to overcome their own pride and ask for help from someone more. The young man stopped and looked closely at Lily and Eunice. They lowered their eyes down and listened to the guy silently. The way girls lowered their heads alarmed him. The branch asked if their time was over. Eunice replied that a complete solar eclipse should take place soon. On that day, he felt great difficulty, as if he had something bad. He thought that right now the seal was about to break, or someone on the surface will finally decide to take the first step. The branch asked again, and the young answered that there was a cathedral in this city. She added that she always wondered why this cathedral was so huge. He said that if it is the main element that provides printing on the surface, then in this case there will be something. Eunice has not yet had time to agree as the Goots suddenly interrupted him. The guy asked Eunice with horror whether he really hinted that someone intended to destroy the cathedral. The introduced replied that such a development is quite possible. Lilia added that the follower of the declined king, who had lost his mighty swordmaster in advance, was able to get to the cathedral so closely. She assumed that it was most likely done to make their plan without any mistakes. The branch immediately thought of Godak. Eunice said that he had finally packed the guile. He said they were still going to go. Lilia also added that they really need to move. Eunice added that although he has a slightly distorted sense of time, he believes that the solar eclipse will take place in 3 days at noon. He does not know how many floors they need to overcome. But if by that time they do not manage to seal this place again, it will end there. Lilia looked at the Gila and turned to him. She said it did not apply to him. The branch looked at her astonishment. Lilia looked at him seriously and said that she and Eurus came here with an important mission. She also added that if one of them leaves, she will not succeed again. The girl returned to Gila and said that this mission would not need his help. Gil was upset. He realized that he no longer had any confidence in his own survival. although, to be honest, it was so before. And if they are not lucky, and the next on their way will appear a huge apocryphal monster, it will no longer be about victory or defeat. Here will be guaranteed death. Lily stopped, smiled widely, and thanked Gila with her heart that he had gone with her such a long way. She had a noticeably cheerful and added that he had already done more for her than enough. The young man was in full despair. He realized that in this maze he would have to meet face to face with his own weaknesses. For example, if he suddenly was left without glasses, he would not even be able to fight. And now Jill has lost not only his own life, he is no longer able to protect those who were dear to him. He said he was going to tell something, and maybe it would not seem quite logical. The young man noticed that it was frightening because there was almost no time for eclipse. He added that there is a long way ahead. The branch was silent. Lilia looked at him worriedly, and Eunice realized that the boy has no reason to fight. Despite all this, he still pleaded with Gila to risk his life for the sake of saving the world. And Eunice, meanwhile, asked him to take them to the lowest level. Jill felt his heart anxiously pounding. However, it was not because of something pleasant. It was only covered by fear of great responsibility and heavy burden. Then Jill dropped on his knees, extending his arms, and confessed, "He only knows how to own a sword. He knows nothing more." Lilia was wondered if he really thought. The branch at the same time realized that he did not develop a sense of orientation in space, and if there is no one nearby, he will never see the sky again. Lilia smiled and thanked the boy. The branch, leaning on the hands of Lily and Eunice, rose to his feet. At this point, he realized that he almost forgot why he came to this maze, because his purpose was to go through him. Eunice and Lilia, with joy and smile, made the decision of Jill to stay with them on a trip, and here 3 young men moved on their way. Their steps were no longer as light as before, and for some reason hope was glowing in their eyes. When someone asked which road he would choose, the other just smiled and said he would trust his own intuition. In the meantime, Kuraha remembered how she has heard this name more than once. In ancient chronicles, it belonged to a terrible enemy, a servant of a fallen king, an apocryphal monster. At that moment he appeared in the city. Arlen lifted her eyes and could not believe what she saw. The wreckage left behind by the monster suddenly flew straight at her. She inadvertently wondered if the king woke up again. However, the girl quickly rejected these thoughts. Now was not the best moment for such reasons. She moved forward and called Kara to hurry, because they needed to get to the cathedral as soon as possible. Otherwise, only burnt land will remain from this city. Kara exclaimed that she had understood everything. She remembered how Holland asked her to go with Arlene, promising to return as soon as she found her family. In her head, she considered what she should start with. Her thoughts were circling around Gil, Godok, and Godland. She remembered well as the branch stayed in the maze. Kuraha was in despair. She so wanted someone to reach for her help. She looked forward. Kuroka stopped. Arlene turned to find out what was the matter. But Kuroka waited for her, they say, go forward. In the meantime, a real chaos prevailed in the city. Many inhabitants threw everything in panic, hoping to escape, and around them all began to gradually collapse. The dried apricots noticed a little girl lying on the ground near the destroyed building. The girl asked if she was fine with her mother, and said she couldn't find her. Gorky girl sobbed, looking around. Kira quietly approached her, took a stick and began to remove the remains of destruction. She promised to help now. Kira pushed a large stone and gently wrapped the girl to herself. Kurakma thought what she to do in such a situation now. She remembered that when she was talking about Gila, she never managed to reach for help. Kira smiled and asked the girl if she could get up, but she took her hand and thanked her. Kira felt that everything would change from now on. The girl lifted the other on her back. When she turned, she saw with surprise, on the right and left behind them, were 2 terrible monsters that resembled huge spiders. One of the monsters rushed at them rapidly. Kuroka wondered how these creatures from the maze were able to get here. The girl decided that it was time to give them repel. But I realized that it was in vain. It was necessary to run immediately. Kura saw a huge monster coming directly in front of her. At that moment, 2 people appeared and became between the girl and the monster. One of them noticed Kura, turned and called for her. A man with blonde hair came closer to the Kura and a girl. The second man wondered if everything was fine with them. Subsequently, Holland came closer. He tightened with a cigarette and reported that they almost got to the cathedral. Now all that remains is to help the wounded. Kuraha noticed him and called him. He turned and was very surprised to see her here. They were approached by a man whom Kuraha met earlier, barely moving. He sharply grabbed him by the collar and asked what it all means. Kuraka tried to answer something uncertainly, but she was interrupted. Blondin shouted that Hasleen had had a long time to escape. The shave removed his hand and said that he had nothing left to do. He grabbed his head and added that now it no longer matters. The man noticed that he finally tried to persuade the girl to go with the holy knights. However, nothing seemed. Hoshlin continued and said he was convinced that Kuraka would not agree, no matter what they were doing, and whatever way they would try to convince him. The man smiled and explained that the whole thing was that the girl was very similar to them. He looked at her carefully and added that the hat was as weak and inexperienced. But despite all this, she is not afraid to move on. As before, they did not give up their dreams. Hoblin remembered how they spent time together under the guidance of Godak. No matter how much she was repelled, she did not stop and stubbornly searched for a new way. Golan said that Kura-ha is extremely stubborn and persistent, and never retreats. The man confidently said that Kira is sure to be an outstanding adventure search in the future. However, in response, the girl looked at him thoughtfully. She was wrapped in disbelief. Another guy explained that this is why Kurak had to leave the city earlier until something like this happened. He exclaimed that she had to do everything before, even before she wrought as well as everyone else. Before Kura-ha found herself in shackles, from which it is impossible to get out. Previously, she could have turned into a pathetic shadow of herself, as it happened to others. The room prevailed in the room. Everyone listened, lowering their heads. The guy gradually calmed down, especially when his friend carefully put his hand on his head. Godland at this time set another cigarette. Kurak watched carefully for everything. She confidently told everyone that she was not going to run. This amazed everyone present. Holland just smiled and noted that everything happened exactly as he predicted. Kuroka was inquiringly worthy of whether this rule does not apply to them. Otherwise, they would not come here completely armed. She asked them if they had a desire to fight. The young man shouted loudly that yes, of course. She was surprised, and then turned to everyone saying, if not, then who would do it? He said that their families live in this city, so they should be near and protect the dear heart of people. Golan smoked silently, and agreed with everything he heard. He was mentioned how they had repeatedly sat together, conducting sincere conversations about important things. He remembered the times when they were sitting in the band with Godak and others. Then the Godak was asked if the guild had some value for him. He replied that yes, he really feels it. Here he found support that he was missing. The man was convinced that it was worth helping the next generation to find his resistance just as he succeeded. He always dreamed of becoming a support that would help someone to extend the path and reach even more. Then Holland remembered how once invented the name for their guild. The man shouted that if they were not able to protect their own city, they did not deserve to call the heroes of Hansland. He addressed everyone, calling for true courage and determination. Plan the future. They may have lost their dignity. Holland looked at a little girl who gladly returned to her parents, and near the hen waved her hand for goodbye. The man called her and ordered not even to think of death. Kiracha replied that she was clear. And then the brave adventurers of the rank S decided to act. They boldly rushed into battle. Everyone rushed into the battle and began to take one of the monsters. Halen shouted to the archers, urging them to follow him, because he needed a height to shoot on top. Kuraka called everyone to keep calm and go to the cathedral because there you can hide there. Suddenly, one of the monsters managed to break through and move straight to the chicken. The girl noticed him and threw him in his direction a small bag. At the same moment, a dazzling light flashed around. Kuroka turned and closed her eyes, because she became too bright. The girl used a light grenade. She could slowly slow down the monster. But this was more than enough. Kuroka informed everyone that now it is possible to go, because the path was already opened and it was visible where to go. Hofflin shouted loudly that the 5th Street is already cleared, and now they need to retreat. He also added that he needed help in the east. The Holland noted that they had already full of arrows, and ordered others to shoot further, because no monster should remain alive. One of the guys replied that he understood everything. At this time, archers constantly released arrows on the monsters, preventing them from getting closer. The chicken stopped for a moment to rest a little. She wiped his sweat from his forehead and looked up, looking at the top. The girl noticed how Kurlin showed her to the class, and realized that she completed the task well. She smiled, looking at his hand. Karak turned her gaze on him and saw an apocryphal beast just rushed at them. Her eyes have expanded with horror. Fear gripped her whole nature. The girl screamed her head immediately, ordered to return. And it was at this moment that a huge monster bird appeared near him. Everyone was already lying on the ground when the insurance landed. The Holland saw a fierce bird to attack. He thought that her feathers were probably made of real steel. Hoslin fell, and throwing his gaze sideways, noticed that even Cora was not able to resist the fall. Both fell to the ground. Kurokaha asked if she was all right with Hoxilin. Holding his head, he said that everything is well with him. The man thanked the girl. One way or another, it was she who saved him in this situation. Olina jumped her eyebrows and seriously told the girl that it is now much more important. The man, in the meantime, asked her to quickly collect her things. After all, they now have to watch death directly in the eye. The same giant monster stood before him. Both looked directly at him. Suddenly a voice was heard. Holland asked who was here. Someone exclaimed that the monster finally attracted the attention. Kuraha was calling Hazan for help, but he interrupted her, saying he was too early. Holland heard someone shouted that it was necessary to act immediately. He looked around and saw that magicians had already gathered around the monster. They took advantage of their magic, directing powerful energy simply to the monster, so the sorcerers managed to stick and hold it. Kuraka exclaimed the joy that they managed to catch the monster. But Godlen noted that it is too early to rejoice. He ordered everyone to shoot in a monster until he could move, and not give him a minute for reflection. Holland urged to sprinkle the monster with a whole hail of arrows without stopping for a moment. There are many arrows that whistle in the air, flying rapidly in a monster. Kuraha keeps closely at everything without missing any detail. She guessed that everyone was trying to attack his wings. This is the usual tactic in the battle with flying monsters. Gorland loudly ordered the archers not to stop and shoot further as much as possible. He himself took Luke himself, fell his bowstring, and did not look out of the monster, preparing for the next shot. He reasoned, no matter how strong his feathers, they would not save him if they shoot directly closely. Suddenly, awareness came to the king. She screamed loudly to stop Holland, convincing him that there was an unfortunate mistake. It seemed to her that the institutions were actually dragons. The girl warned that the monster was torn out the flames. And at the same moment the fiery stream with a roar struck everyone. The monster dropped it inside. The Holland did not have time to blink, as it suddenly rushed to Kuroka and shook him, trying to take a stroke of the fire on himself. The man exclaimed with surprise. He could not understand what this girl was doing here. Hunklin strictly ordered her to leave immediately. Meanwhile, Kuraka smiled and encouraged Chaland to hit the weak place of the monster. Halaland clenched his teeth and muttered dissatisfied that Korma was a real fool. Kurakma thought, "The most important thing is to understand what cards you have in your hands. Even if they seem completely unnecessary at first glance, there is always a moment when certain things can be useful in any situation. It is then that the same card that really needs your protection will appear." And during a team battle against them came the chicken hat. Her body pierced a fire stroke, and the girl put out of unbearable pain. The Kuraka seemed to be burning with fire. Everything was also around the flames. As a child, she has repeatedly read adventure stories that she always loved all her soul. The dragon's breath is both a great danger and an incredible chance. Each time when Kuroka saw such dreams, her heart squeezed out of excitement. From childhood, she dreamed of adventures that turned life. The monster did not stop and continued to attack. Gargland, covered by the rage, began to shoot her with all his strength, using the majestic bow of the owner of the wind. Stopping, Hall immediately called Kuraha, and hurried to make sure that everything was fine with her. Dutch asked her if she was alive. Kura's barely audible that yes, trying to raise her hand. He smiled and was incredibly glad. The man strictly ordered the girl to stay in place and not move under any circumstances, because now he would call a healer from the cathedral. He asked her to hold on to his return. Haglin confessed that if it were not for her, he would definitely fail to defeat that monster. The man looked at her with gratitude, sincerely appreciating everything that Keha did for him. He said the girl did a great job. Kuraka felt awful. The girl tried to smile and turn her despair into humorous words. Daland assured that they would take care of all other monsters, so the girl can still rest. She thanked him for his care. Holland noticed that Karak saved not only them but the whole city. He added that when the girl wakes up, she will be presented with a medal. Suddenly cries. Not even had time to agree. Gaslin raised his head and saw a whole flock of flying monsters filled the sky, rapidly heading just to the city. The man released a cigarette from his hands, struck by what he saw. Others shouted around that it was simply impossible. They barely coped with one monster, and now they have been in front of several. The Dutch was freezing in place. He could not move at all. He was covered by such a fear that he fell silent. Everyone was looking at him in surprise. Someone called his name loudly. One of the men shouted to keep everyone immediately to the cathedral. He assured that he would be able to detain enemies and win a little time for others. Hazen looked at him with surprise, not believing heard. Someone shouted that the whole kingdom was threatened with destruction. Hossalons immediately called and asked to leave here as soon as possible. Kura had already asked him to leave. The man scolded and shouted with anger. One of his comrades commanded everyone who still had strength to put out full, and all of us others had to stand on their side. He explained that it should distract other monsters, even if it takes only a few seconds. He shouted, ordering everyone to shoot. Suddenly Gorland turned and saw a monster on the wings light a flame. The man decided that the previous moment was worth nothing compared to this, and he rushed. Holland understood that he would not have time to escape. The flames were relentlessly approaching him. Other archers froze with horror, unable to take the eyes from this scene. Hayal shouted at despair, notwithstanding what was happening now. Everyone fought hard, trying to save their lives. And Kurahal just stood still and watched the horror. Monsters that were just surprisingly quickly stuck around. But suddenly a guy with a sword in his hand appeared in the sky. It turned out to be Eunice. He rushed to the monster, entering the battle. Kira could barely see the silhouette of the one who stood before her, but could not understand who it was. Eunice smiled and noted that they seemed to come just on time. However, she added that the complete solar eclipse would only begin at dawn. He raised his hand, and Eunice was already prepared to show what the supreme magician of stars could achieve, overcoming many trials and difficulties. What the guy received was a real force. Eunice applied his magic, and in the sky began a starfall that struck directly on the monsters, striking them one by one. Meanwhile, Lilia decided to congratulate everyone. She waved her hand and saw a soldier in Arnade. The girl gladly said she finally returned. Arnade exclaimed in delight, sincerely surprised by the return of the saint. Lily apologized that she was delayed. Arnalete already wanted to ask Lilia where she disappeared all this time. She was annoyed and strictly asked Lilia not to turn to her anymore at strangers. Although it was no longer important now, Arnalete still decided to tell the girl what was happening in the city. Arcanaut said that there are many casualties and destruction now. 3 roads to the cathedral have already been blocked, and the appearance of such a large number of instances has only worsened the situation. Lilia said she is now fully trusting her question. She sighed and added that Arnade could still help. The woman entered the building, and everyone around began to shout her name as soon as she was noticed her presence. The girl saw in front of her a woman who lay exhausted, and a little girl sobbed next to her. She shouted loudly that something had happened to her mother. Lilia reassured her, saying that she would not worry about anything. Meanwhile, Arnada raised her head and saw those huge monsters. They looked frightened and began to fall to the ground. Arnalata noticed how Lily dropped on her knees and began to spell. The girl confidently stated that there would be no sacrifice from now on. A bright light broke out in the room. Arnali closed her face with her hands so as not to blind. Returning, she saw the girl's mother finally came to her senses. The girl, happily exclaiming, rushed to her mother and hugged her firmly. Arnlet noticed that the woman had just healed right in her eyes. It struck her to the heart. She felt true relief and joy, thinking that Lilia is still alive. The bright light swept everything around. People looked around in surprise, noticing how their wounds disappeared in their eyes, and every moment everyone became more healthier. Gaviland was surprised to look to the sky. Suddenly he turned sharply and saw the chicken Ha. The girl was standing nearby and looked thoughtfully at her palm. She could not believe her eyes. The wounds on the body disappeared directly in the eyes, and the forces gradually returned. When the girl tried to get up, the guy's silhouette suddenly distinguished her. The young man turned. Kuraha noticed Agila, who smiled at her. He apologized to get lost. The branch reasoned how difficult it was for so much time to check every corner without even having to sit for at least a minute. I spent 3 days on a hill where I had to fight every monster that happened on the way. These were incredibly difficult and grueling days. Gathering with his forces, the branches took a deep breath and shouted loudly, trying to call the cock. She asked where he was. The girl in response said she was sitting right here. The young man turned and looked at her in surprise. He did not even imagine that the girl was standing right next to him. The branch looked forward and saw Holland, who carefully monitored his every movement. He scored and remembered their joint plan for the future for a moment. Holland was in full confusion. The branch sat side by side and asked quietly in the Kura what was really going on. And Eunice, meanwhile, said that only she remains on his side. The girl said that when the animals began to attack, all the inhabitants quickly evacuated to the cathedral, at the same time protected the escape routes and took care of those who did not have time to get out on their own. But then there were apocryphal beasts. Kiraham realized that if it were not for them, they would not have become. The branch thought about it. The guy wondered how well she knew something about apocryphal animals and whether they already managed to find their leader. The girl asked him and honestly confessed that such as he had not met. The branch said that in this case the purpose was clearly the cathedral. The man thought that if you wait a little, everything would be clear. The branch asked Karai if she could take him there. The girl smiled and immediately agreed, of course, without any problems. Dutch stood behind the man. He addressed him as a hero and asked what to do next. Gil turned and looked at the Holland in surprise, not believing heard. He was quietly interested in whether they needed help. The young man thought of these words. Kuroka turned to him and said that now none of them would run away. He looked into her eyes and calmly replied that he understood everything. The branch replied that he did not need their help and advised them to focus better on the rescue of other people. The branch also noted that he was counting on them. In response, the man assured that they would take into account everything they need. The dried apricots pointed to one of the houses and reported that a large building was behind it. The branch thought about what he heard. The girl looked at him in surprise. The guy hardly tried to understand what exactly shows him Kurach. The girl noticed that Gil saw nothing. She asked him to wait only for a moment. The girl put his glasses in his hands. Kuraha said that she kept them specifically to hand them personally. She suggested that the glasses may have been damaged during the last battle. The girl cautiously opened the box. The branch raised his glasses. The girl watched closely at his every movement. The guy lifted his glasses up, and a sincere smile appeared on his face. He did not hide his joy. Kurakam asked if the glasses were intact. Jill immediately exploded with a joyful exclamation. He put his glasses immediately. With unheard-of joy, the guy exclaimed that he now sees everything around. He finally opened the city, dawn and heaven. He showed his finger on everything and clearly called everything he saw. The building, the stone, even the dog. The branch did not look at anything. Everything was carefully noticed in front of him. The guy exclaimed that he can now see absolutely everything thanks to his new glasses. Jill turned to the girl and asked, "Wasn't it cool?" Kuroka was so surprised that she did not even know what to answer. But then she still agreed with him. The girl continued to look at him. The branch smiled, removed his cloak and threw it on the shoulders of the chicken Ha. The branch confessed that now, when he was wearing glasses, he began to notice a lot of little things. This is exactly how he noted that Kuraka probably froze. The girl smiled and thanked him. In response, the branch winked with her and, without spending time, moved forward, declaring that now they need to rush to the cathedral. Karak exclaimed that he did not run there, because it was the wrong way. She smiled in thoughts, because even with Gil glasses, she was still confused with directions. Meanwhile, Lily went down and was surprised to see Jill standing right in front of her. She noted that Jill had changed her face. The guy smiled at this and replied that she may not know, but usually called it, to wear glasses. The girl smiled and said that he was incredibly lucky. His glasses were very suitable. Jill smiled widely in response and agreed with her words. Lily also reported that she has good news. Jill looked at her in surprise, waiting for explanations. The girls said that they had spent almost all their efforts on print and huge spells from Unice. They tried so much and invested in that energy. That is, we can say that they have no longer left. The branch was surprised and asked why it could be called good news. Hearing the steps behind, he turned instantly. Kuraha also looked carefully. Lily met them with a warm smile. She reported that Jill would fight with him one-on-one. Kira asked uncertainly whether it was the same man previously mentioned by Jill. The man was approaching them. When the question was whether this is the leader of the girl Astili, the holiday calmly answered that everything was the way she suggested. That is, it is an apocriac magic artifact. Kira asked if Lily meant Erasim. Kira thought about the legendary magical equipment. After all, there are only 13 unique artifacts that the king once possessed. Nilea said she was sure that he just took this sword in his hands, his heart and mind plunged into the comprehensive hatred of the fallen king. All this was done only to bring back to life a fallen king. Gil turned to Godak, asking him to listen to the guy completely. The branch added that the abyss was already sealed thanks to the Holy and Archimage, so even if he destroys the cathedral, the fallen king would not get out of there anymore. The man was stubbornly approaching them. He said Jill flee because he would never be able to defeat the fighter. Kira and Lily were carefully observed. Gil wondered that he had not lost consciousness yet. It seems different and could not be when you face the adventure of such a high rank as a S level. He continued and noted that no person should even hope to overcome this magical sword. Gil immediately grabbed his sword and lifted him from the ground. The young man asked Godak whether he called Jill. The guy confessed that he understood for many years. He could not cope. The branch came to the conclusion that this man was also aware. If he did not intervene, the overthrown king would definitely return to life. So the man gathered all the last forces that still remained with him and sent Gila to make the guy seal the maze. But he replied that even the branches would not cope with it, so it is better to run away from here. Gil seriously said that he was still lacking in experience, but with this sword he will definitely prove that he made the right choice. Jill's sword finally returned. The man smiled widely, preparing for the future battle. The branch witnessed how his opponent turned into a real monster in an instant. He knew well. Often the result of the battle was solved by the first blow. Almost half of the cases depends on him. The guy saw the Godok's hand suddenly grew to a giant size. It was then that Gil decided to act the first. He rushed into battle, rushing forward. He swung to hit, but the guy immediately realized. The blow was blocked immediately. Godox grabbed the genus body with a giant hand, but the guy managed to escape using his sword. He pushed him away and the branch flew away. The guy noticed that she was going to attack again, so he quickly jumped so that her hands would not get it. The branch struck the sword. After that, he began to carefully monitor his opponent. The guy quickly noticed that the Endak had an incredible ability to recover. Therefore, his body is immediately restored. The branch noticed how she runs to him again. The guy thought that there were only two ways to deal with him. The first is to attack continuously until the mana is completely over. The branch pierced his sword directly into the stomach, cutting the body in half. Then he looked around without looking at his eyes. The guy realized that with such an opponent he was hopeful. He began to crack everything around him. At that moment, the branches thought that there was another way here. The young man gathered with his forces and jumped to the feed. His second plan was to kill the enemy with a single blow. He used the 8th sword along with the ability to split the lightning, causing a decisive blow. Gil with one sword struck his head. He immediately noticed how the steam began to rise from the enemy's body. Gil monitored every movement of Godok, and suddenly he heard a strange gurgling sound. Suddenly strange sounds came, and the magic was released in that place. There was an explosion that caused true devastation. The branch barely rested on his feet. The only reason he was still alive was that he had restrained this power for years. The young man saw a giant failure that appeared immediately after the explosion. The branch came to the conclusion that all this happened because he hit Godak with his magic sword. The young man noticed how the recovery process began in the place of the cutoff. This is where it all started. It was a sword that penetrated into the soul of the Goduk warrior and destroyed the obstacle in his way. The branch noticed that new teeth and jaws grow from under the body of Godok. At least that's so far. The monster again quenched and rushed to Gila, causing him blows. It took very little time as the swordsman came again. The boy's eyes expanded with surprise, and he had to restrain the bumps of Godox. The branch thought, now the sword is experiencing incredible rage. It was not just anger but true madness, a feeling that he had never encountered before. That guy looked right at the Godak. After regeneration, the monster appeared the likeness of the head, a distorted face with eyes and teeth. For the first time in the whole time since the hunter on magical swords was born, he felt a real fear of one sword. The guild decided that next time it would break this sword. He confidently directed his weapon simply to the goal. It was an extremely strange feeling. Unlike new knowledge or awakening, the soul of Gila moved much faster than his body, or understanding of what was happening to him. This is how you really have to own a sword. He immediately directed his strength to Jill, but he cleverly evaded. The young man watched every movement. In the meantime, he grabbed the guy, but the branch did not get lost. He immediately detached his fingers, which he kept him. His colt protruded just in front of the branches, not hiding pain and despair. He understood that he would never have got the way as it was now, even if he tried hard. The guy believed that it would be impossible if there were none among them. At such moments, the branches mentioned Godok, the saint and the Univi, which always smiled at him with his eternal smile. The young man realized that if he had given up at least once, regardless of the reason, he would never be able to surpass himself and go beyond his capabilities. The girlfriend smiled, remembered Kurak, and thanked everyone for everything he had experienced. The guy was already preparing for the attack again. The monster was constantly coming directly to him, and he thanked everyone who helped him reach this moment. Gil smiled and with one sharp movement flew the torso of the monster. To do this, he used the unusual secret technique of his sword, which he pierced the enemy. Just as Jill used this technique, an exhausted Godak appeared from under the shell and immediately fell to the ground. The young man lifted his sword and looked around, trying to understand where the strange sound came from. He later reached the place where others were already waiting for him. The branch noticed how people were greeted and exclaimed, seeing him. He smiled and wondered with a slight laughter whether they really worried about him. Karaka smiled widely. Lily also looked very happy, and Eunice sat on the roof of one of the houses and loudly robbed everything around. The girlfriend smiled. He was aware that he could not fully accept it. That guy raised his hand with joy. In his gesture there was a real relief after everything he had to endure. A little time passed and Jill was in his own bed. He slept firmly, but even through a dream he heard Lilia hard to call him. The young man saw the girl trying to wake him up. She knocked a tatty on a pan to make such a noise that Jill would wake up exactly. The young man got a bad sleep and barely opened his eyes. The girl greeted him with a good morning. The branch looked at her silently, trying to open her eyes wider, and eventually wished her a good morning. In a few days, Jill was preparing for the exit, clasping his shirt. His hair became shorter than before. Lily turned to him and asked if the guy was going today. She added that it is probably better to wake up that guy before. Lily also wondered if Jill was not offended. The guy replied that he was not, and even added that he was grateful to Lily for awakening him so early. The girl smiled widely, sparkling at her eyes, and hiding the tatty behind her back. Then she left the room. Lilia added that he would not interfere with him. She advised to dress and wash, emphasizing that she is in fact indifferent whether he would do it or not. Everything that the girl wanted was that he could handle everything as soon as possible. Lilia quickly left his room. The branch stayed with a smile on his face. He closed his eyes and imagined the girl in the apron. He blushed and thought that it was not possible to imagine the best spectacle in the morning. The guy believed that he did his best to mutilate this feeling. Although the tense atmosphere did not rest, he gradually began to understand everything. Due to the fact that Junis was talking to her, the branch finally decided that if a fool decided to call Lily an 80-year-old grandmother, he would get for nuts. Suddenly, the boys' thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected guest. Eunice appeared in front of them. The guy smiled widely and greeted the warmth with her. And Eunice, in response, noted with a smile that she did not see him from the morning. The branch smiled embarrassed to him, and Eunice, despite the early hour, was already in a surprisingly good mood. She laughed quietly. And he said he was in fact just going to go to bed. Eunice added that he felt like a squeezed lemon, quite exhausted. Then he asked Gila if he would have breakfast. He answered consent. Together they went to the same dining room, where at the very end they noticed Lily, who gladly waved their hands. She looked a lot of cheerful. The boys also smiled, and the branch thought that Lilia, apparently, had already started eating without them. Finally, everyone sat down at the table and started having breakfast. There was breakfast on one of the plates, and Lily, meanwhile, chewed her piece of bread with visible pleasure. The girl noticed that they probably have to come together so much. Junis asked Gila if he was about to go soon. The guy answered in the affirmative and added that he planned to leave before noon. Lily continued to eat calmly and wondered if the bowl was needed. She remembered that Paratron had already asked her. The branch refused, they say, and so will cope. The girl in response said she was clear now. Everyone was sitting at the table, eagerly filling their mouths with delicious dishes. Dinner seemed to be glory. Everyone was satisfied. Junis asked if they said goodbye immediately after breakfast. The branch answered it in the affirmative. He also added that he also needed to go to the hospital for a short time. After that, he asked if they had already come to their senses. Lilia gladly replied that it was. Jill took a cup of tea and smiled. His heart warmed the idea that he would finally come when he made a promise that he postponed so much time. Lily also smiled and took a cup of tea. She replied that now everything was clear to her. The branch already wanted to say something about their promise, but the girl interrupted him. Lily only reminded the guy. Let her not forget to write to her. Eunice and Jill were silent. A few seconds passed and they mentioned it. The girl wondered if they had forgotten. Lilia added that it was not cool at all. The girl asked Gila be sure to write to her when he decided to stay in a city. The guy smiled and promised that he would definitely do it. It would not be a problem for him. Lilia asked them if they remember what she had a sweet and good handwriting. Eunice happily exclaimed that such a handwriting would come a truly wonderful secret cipher. The branch listened to them silently and watched them. Then he turned and, as if warning, said that his letters were unlikely to be particularly interesting. Lilia replied that she was still waiting for them. Eunice encouraged the boy and advised to invent something interesting. The branch smiled and promised that he would try. He smiled and lowered his head. Lilia from Unis also did not hide their joy. Their faces glowed with sincere smiles. The branch rose from the table. Lilia reminded him that he would be watching that the guy took care of himself. Eunice also supported her words. Lilia called him and raised her finger, attracting attention. Jill turned, looked at her in surprise. She smiled widely and asked jokingly, "How about a farewell kiss?" The branch stood without believing in his ears. He did not understand what was happening right now. Eunice and Lilia stretched gloves in the form of toy animals, laughing fun. Jumpy, the girl turned to the male of the gill and said that he would prepare for a kiss. Eunice and Jill decided to joke a little with Jill. She came closer, folded her cute gloves together and kissed him in a child. The young man did not expect such a turn at all. He was very surprised and drew from surprise. Apparently, Jilov did not like it at all. Meanwhile, the guy took their gloves and decided to pay them out that they did with him. The young man took to the toy and began to touch them with the faces of both lilies, which acted in unison, while jokingly making funny sounds. From this, both lilies could not restrain laughter. While Jill did it, he thought it was much more interesting than it seemed at first. With the help of one of the toys, he easily pulled Eunice by the cheek. After this fun game, all three grabbed hands. Lily returned to Junis and Gila. They looked at her in surprise. The girl smiled warmly and said that all three would meet again. After a while, when the branch had already moved away from the gate, he looked around and smiled, thinking that all this was apparently appointed fate. After that, the young man decided to go on the road. The branch visited one of the hospitals. He turned to the nurse and asked where he needed to go. She replied that the boy should climb the 4th floor. The branch finally found the right room, and before you go, knocked on the door. From there, he heard someone's voice who invited him to enter. The branch went to the room and immediately assured that he did not need to apologize. A guy with a bandaged hand sat in front of him, and members of the Gill group stood next to him. The man got out of bed instantly and shouted to the young man. He asked Goodak not to overwork himself with such sharp movements. The branch added that he heard, "His muscles and bones have not yet recovered after exposure to the magical sword." So in such a situation, the branches advised him to just lie down and relax. He sincerely apologized, lowering his head, and quietly added that he wanted to reconcile earlier than Jill came. But since this guy is already here, it is probably soon to go away. Gil said he decided to visit them the last time. The young man also gave the woman flowers, to which she replied that it was very nice on his part. He looked at him again, and immediately lowered his eyes, feeling guilty of him. He confessed that he knew. Jill asked him not to apologize, but still the man sought to say something. He added that he could not fully thank Clea, and also properly apologize. At that moment, the branch stared at him, as if trying to unravel what he was feeling. He told how he personally lured him in a trap. He crafted into his back, and then left to die, throwing one in the middle of the confused maze. The branch thought that it was used again. He added that the saint, along with the Archmage, was able to seal the force again. He also noted that Gil was even able to destroy the apocryphal equipment. It turns out that the guy saved not only this city, but the whole world. Feeling guilt, Jill smiled and rejoiced, realizing that they really went a considerable way. It seemed to him incredibly cool. He said that it was probably impossible for a person like him, so that ever I can thank Gila or ask for an apology. He shouted that no matter what he said, he would do everything he is capable of, even if he had to give for this life. The branch was very upset when he heard this only from Godesh. He immediately demanded to stop and never say this. He could not understand why Jill was trying to argue with him. At this point, a man approached him and reported that he should find out something. The branch added that he is really indifferent. He said it, explaining. At a moment when he almost killed the boy, he was shining well. He looked at the Gila with a clear sadness in his eyes. It was unclear that this guy was trying to convey. He just said that Goodak just had no other choice. The man looked at him carefully and said that if he had made at least one mistake, Jill could have perished without any doubt. He took a deep breath and said that after numerous visits of Godaha members, most of whom now remained nearby, they asked for forgiveness once after. It was first and foremost for what he did with the Gil, for their own weakness and fear, as well as for such serious guilt, because of which they would never be allowed to call themselves adventurers in such a situation. Jill added that despite all these circumstances, he is completely indifferent to all this. I was just amazed at what he had just heard from him. The young man said that he had not forced him to go to the maze with him and did not lure in any trap. The guy felt he was trusting him. The man lifted his gaze. The branch added that everyone is doing everything that he is capable of, as well as he can. These are the turns of fate. It was because of their strengths and weaknesses that they were where they are now, and everyone must choose how to treat it. The Gudway smiled widely and confessed that, despite all the difficulties, he was glad that they had to go this confusing and difficult way. He was so impressed that he could not utter a word. The tears rolled on his cheeks, and he hurriedly closed his face with his hand. Gil added that he was most proud of the fact that, despite his cursed body, it was chosen by a sword that had to pave the way. On the narrow path on which the man dared to step, the tears of Godok dropped on his sheet. He was still crying, closing his face with his hands. Gil said that it was the years of his life that brought him here, and gave him a chance to save the whole world. He bowed and sincerely thanked this man for his opportunity. He soon left a hospital in which he spent many years. He threw the last glance at her, smiled and moved on. The branch noticed a number of carts. His gaze also stopped at the Archnatius, who was in the midst of work, gave teams to workers and controlled everything around. The girl looked around and noticed the boy. She was very surprised. Meanwhile, one of the workers recognized Jill, and he was straining immediately. All the views immediately turned to the Gila. People recognized in him their savior, a hero who saved their city. On all sides, the exclamations of admiration were heard. He was called a hero, a liberator, and a teacher. The guy asked not to contact him, Mr. In response. One of the attendees was sincerely apologized, explaining that this is all because Jill appreciates their saint. so no one could imagine that this young man could do differently than with proper respect. The guy replied that now he understood everything. Someone laughed and apologized, calling Clea a true gentleman again. Meanwhile, a girl in glasses approached him. She began to tell everything she knew about Jill's death. After all, legends went about her strength. However, the girl could not even imagine that Jill would return again. She added that everyone was very grateful to him, and if he suddenly needs something, Jill can always turn to them. The guy thought that this girl is an Arniate, and she was serving lilies. Jill drank water and thought that Arnate, apparently, a good man. The girl smiled and asked the boy what could be useful. She added that Lilia told her that the guy was going to go. The branch nodded in response and confirmed it. He asked Arnate where the Kuraha was located. The girl immediately grabbed and announced it loudly that Mr. Guil wanted to talk to her. She wondered if someone knew where the girl is now. And at once everyone paid attention to it, happily exclaiming that they came to them the hero, the savior, and Mr. Gill. One of the girls said that if they were looking for a cock, she would soon return. Arn Lilith smiled and thanked her for a hint. She glowed with happiness, overflowing with joy. Arnaleta informed Clea that all the cases were already in power. Now he had only to wait a little. Our point said that she was time to get back to work. The branch felt a sweat on his forehead. He thought about how shame he is and how strange and inconvenient this situation was. In the meantime, he was already greeted as a great hero. The man turned and saw Hosland in front of him. He noticed his clothes and was about to say something about it, but Dutch interrupted him, adding that he was going on the road today. The branch nodded and said he understood everything. Then he asked the man whether he was in Godok. Gosland smiled and confirmed that he really attended this place recently. The guy replied that now everything was clear to him. Goglin moved forward, but suddenly stopped. He looked around and looked at the Clea. Then Goglin turned to the great hero and proclaimed that he would never be able to truly thank him for his help. Gillis Sherdian thought that he had heard such words 1,000 times. So he asked the man how their research was moving. Poland replied in surprise that it was thanks to Clea that everything goes as best as possible. After all, now, when the king's pavshi was sealed again, and the evil that seeps through the seal gradually disappears, it has become much easier to study the maze. However, its structure still remains very confusing, so they have not yet managed to reach deeper levels. When they finally found a convenient way, each time they arranged a camp at a certain distance to fix themselves in a new place. Gilda made a sip of water and answered. Now everything has become clear before him. The man noted that, as he said earlier, to go through the door should be as careful as possible. Somewhere there is still a small monster, but even if nothing is visible, you cannot lose vigilance. Holland understood everything. He promised to join the first big hike at the lower levels to follow the situation around. The branch in response noted that he was very much hopeful. He added that as a last resort, it is always better to have many people who are able to defeat apocryphal animals. Hoglin agreed with him, took a chair and sat down. So Goglin and Jill were near each other under the canopy. Halaland looked at the Gila and asked whether he was, after all, here. He confirmed that it was true. Halaland replied that he had now understood everything. So Gil saw people with the shoulders who walked, straightening. The girl also paid attention to him and called for him. Without hesitation, she immediately rushed to flee to him. They greeted. The branch immediately began to get nervous. Kodland asked why he was so nervous. The guy confessed to him for the first time. Holland looked at him mockingly and asked if he was not a great hero. Kuraha, with a genuine surprise, looked at them, not understanding what was talking about. Hoblin dug him and ordered him to go. The branch burst out of pain, blushed, and said he had promised. The girl began to look carefully at him. Jill began to be nervous. He uncertainly spoke that most likely Heraha no longer remembers all the details. The girl interrupted him, in surprise looking. She couldn't believe that Gil still remembers it. Karach carefully put a purse on the ground. The guy was naked. The girl with pain in her voice said she didn't deserve it all because she did nothing. Kuraha added that if Hodgeland, all other members of the group, Arnolet and the rest did not support her, the girl would definitely not be able to cope with it on her own. Kuras bowed her head, feeling that she was not involved in this situation, and the branch just smiled. He noted that he could also be said about him. Therefore, the guy wondered if Kurakan understands him. Jill added that he would not hurt to get a good kick under the ass. After all, he only did what he could. Kurakarab exploded with bitter tears. The branch did not stop and firmly said that from now on he would always try to cross his own boundaries. During the future searches and destruction of the apocryphal beast, which has passed through the seal, as well as in the dark times that can occur because of this, it will rely in support of others. Those who always stand with a Gil believe that there is nothing wrong with seeking help. To a bold person who always goes forward, no matter what? He asked. He asked Karag if she would help him in this case. The young man reached out to her and smiled. The guild immediately said, he has a terrible sense of space, and if he goes himself, then most likely, he will not even get to the desired routes. Karak was crying bitterly. She felt that her greatest dream, which she dreamed of her lifetime, had come true. The branch added that if a girl helps him in this trip, he will teach her to own a sword in response. She covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. She was a real despair. From the very childhood, Kurak dreamed of becoming a real adventure search. The girl confessed that she was not sure whether it really deserves it. In her memory, moments were still emerging from her childhood when she dreamed of a real heroine. But nevertheless, the girl decided to try anyway. She smiled and answered the guy that she would be happy to travel with him. They shook each other's hands. The girl firmly decided that this time she would not retreat for anything. About 3 years ago, the Gills met the girl and asked to hide him for a while. She wondered if he did not get lost at times. I began to think about whether only the earth had eaten in the last 3 days, and whether it was possible to call the land edible at all. He was allowed to live in this house for some time. The girl explained that if Jill is walking in the city in this form, even with the sword, there will definitely be a lot of problems. Hearing this, the guy crying out. The hostess said she would agree to hide him for a short time, but only if he would not create any problems. The branch thought what a generous girl she was. The guy also asked her to eat something. She asked him to go inside. The guy smiled and called himself a Gill. He also added that he was still known as a dragon killer. The branch assured her, if she needed help, let him just tell him about it. At that moment, the girl silently got her sword. Someone will say that it happened a long time ago, and someone, on the contrary, feels that it was just recently. Now Gil began correspondence with Junis and Lily. He was interested in their lives and asked how they had things. In his letters, the guy also told what was happening in the east. He came here to seek help from a well-known optometrist. However, everything turned bankrupt, and it knocked out the ground from under his feet. However, during this time he met many good people who became true friends for him. Now he thinks seriously to stay here for a long time. Gil wrote that I was glad that everything finally ended after the chaos that caused the maze. He asked in Lily whether she had returned to the main cathedral. He also asked Unanis if he was going to return to a large library. The branch asked them to immediately inform him as soon as they received a letter. The guy decided to ask if they had students before. In fact, for Gila, it is the first such experience, and much is still unclear to him. He gladly listens to their advice. Gilda decided to write a personal letter Lily's. His words on paper sounded not at all when he said aloud. The girl lay on the bed and smiled widely, reading this letter. In a letter to Eunice, Gil confessed that his secret code was too complicated. He wrote that in a whole week he could not solve him. Eunice was glad when she finally received news from Gila. The branch decided to read a letter from Lily, in which she also turned to Eunice. Lilia wrote that she sincerely hoped they both remain as they are and would never change. Separately, she appealed to the Gila to return the mysterious old woman. At the end of the letter, he was signed with love, Lily. The young man also read the letter from Eunice. Turning to both of them, he wrote that he had no friends, not to mention students, and Gilly personally asked that he would think about everything and mention it as often as possible. For 6 hours in a row, Eunice signed, Honestly yours, Archimag. The branch smiled sincerely, closing the letters he had just read. Closing his eyes, he wondered how to answer. He will write to them that Eunice and Lily asked about it. In the meantime, Kura H came up with the guy who called her. The young man looked at her with curiosity, as if waiting for an explanation. The girl suggested that the monsters were probably chatting, so they will not be able to move further. The Highlaster asked if they could walk then. The girl replied that most likely they would succeed. Kura said that according to the map, there should be a road. The branch just smiled gently, remembering that 2 weeks have passed since they left the city. To be honest, the adventure seemed calm enough. The branch suggested walking the rest of the way on foot. Karaha agreed with him. Some may be surprised how this adventure can be called calm, because the optic, which the guy was going to visit, was about to get closer, and the van on which they were traveling was already on the verge of stop. In such a situation, someone may note that it is not at all like a peaceful adventure, but the truth is that Jill often gets off the road or simply creates a new route alone. But when the guy traveled, he really happened to be strange things. Jill decided that there has never been such a similar one. The young man realized that he did not have time to get rid of, as he was in a completely unfamiliar place. To understand where he is, the branch always brought out to the highest points from where he could normally inspect everything around. Or, in such situations, the guy just sailed downstream to get to the ocean. Jill remembered how an incomprehensible way was buried in the ground. He came to the conclusion that all this will not happen to him now. Even in the boldest dreams of the branches, he could not imagine that he would once be able to travel in several places and at the same time not worry about anything. He closed his eyes and plunged into a different way. Meanwhile, Kuraka turned to him. The girl came closer and cautiously grabbed the edge of his jacket. The guy turned instantly. The girl decided to prevent him. She said loudly that it was not necessary to go where Jill calls. The young man looked at her in surprise. He smiled and said he was just looking around. Jill noticed that this year the flowers had not bloomed. The girl agreed with him. Karaha noted that when she remembered it, it seemed to her that the trees had to be covered with leaves. The branch asked the girl if she was well versed in plants. The girl answered that she would not give such an answer. Haraha added that she had just read it in the directory. The man looked at her carefully and said that he understood everything. The branch suddenly realized that these two remind him of a teacher and a student. He mentioned that Kaha had never failed him. The girl wondered in Gila, which he taught her 3 days ago. The guy asked what exactly did she mean. She took the pose and wondered if she needed to keep the sword's sleeve. The branch replied that all this, of course, depends primarily on the circumstances. The guy explained that if the girl holds the sword in this way, he would sway less, and she will be able to invest much more in every blow. Besides the fact that the branch gained new knowledge, he also had the experience of a real battle with instruction. But most striking in this story was how deep the branch understood the essence of the sword. His mentor would definitely say that the real cause of all the troubles is Jill. He remembered how a harsh man once asked him if he was flying thoughts somewhere in the clouds when he held a sword in his hands. Listening to the long-term reflections of the interlocutor, the branch wondered what he now holds the sword in his hands. Meanwhile, Kuraka carefully recorded all the important details that she just heard from Gila. And Gil, meanwhile, smiled even wider, not hiding his good mood. The guy decided that the workout was going great. This is what the branch believed, and he has anxiety. Kiraha noticed that Jill had a strap on his shoes. The girl sat down to help him with this, but the guy assured that everything was fine, and he would be able to handle himself. The girl had fun that everything was fine, and she almost finished repairing his shoes. The branch was worried, feeling inconvenience, but thanked her for her help. Kuraharu only smiled and said that it was not a problem. The young man wondered if Kuroka was honest. Gil noted that the girl not only prepares for the road, but also takes care of every little thing. In recent days, Kuroka has solved even the smallest issues without leaving nothing. This also applies to his daily life, and if it lasts for several months, Jill is afraid that his body will no longer be able to live without it. He felt and thoughtfully considered it all. But most importantly, Kurhara supported Gila during this trip, and instead he taught her skills of possession of a sword. The girl asked if he had sweated and did not get hot. The guy thought that they should be on an equal footing. The branch, of course, understood that because of the story with Korn Kurak, he was now obliged to him. From this balance, she was noticeably shifted in his favor, and the branch felt that it was not good at all. The branch plunged into thinking, looking for a way to help this girl. He thought so deeply that he did not notice how suddenly he was illuminated by an unexpected idea, as if lightning had flashed straight in the middle of thoughts. He called the girl. Kira turned and looked at him. The branch ran to her, gladly shouting that he had found a mushroom. The young man wondered if someone could find him in the directory at all, but soon he noticed something important and dangerous. Unfortunately, it was a poisonous mushroom. In the worst case, even one bite can lead to instant death. And, as it turned out, mountain proteins learned not to be afraid of poison. They constantly eat these mushrooms. That is why those who get lost in the mountains often mistakenly think that the found mushrooms can be eaten. The branch listened carefully and nodded, showing that he understood everything. The girl apologized to interrupted him, but the guy just smiled and assured that nothing was wrong. Karak asked him if he had any questions. The branch replied that the mushroom, though causing ulcers in the mouth and fever, but still remains delicious. After these words, both suddenly fell silent. The girl was stunned that she had just heard from him. The branch realized that the moment came a little to hold their culinary secrets.